We're going.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the March Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting, our monthly meeting. And I'll move right along to the review of the March 24 business meeting agenda. Is everybody good with that? Or does anybody want to change the agenda? Or add?
Ray, before we get too far, I forgot we need to do a quick roll call of the commission.
Okay, Jared, you got the list in front of you, so.
All right. Raymond Kane.
Here.
Mike Pearnock.
Here.
Bill Doyle. Bill Doyle. I see Bill in the attendees, but we'll come back to him. Suki Sawyer.
Yeah, here.
Bill Amaru.
Here.
Khalil Bogdan.
Here.
Chris McGuire.
Here.
Shelley Edmondson.
Here.
Tim Brady. Bill Doyle. All right. Bill must have stepped away. All right, Mr. Chair, continue. Sorry.
That's quite all right, Jared. The review of the March 24 business meeting agenda. Any changes? Anybody want to add something to the agenda?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. We'll move on to the review and approval of the February 2024 draft business meeting minutes.
Motion to approve.
And that was Suki.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suki. I need a second. And then I guess Jared will do a roll call on that.
I'll second it, Ray.
Thank you, Shelley.
All right. Mike Pearnock.
I'm getting up for a second.
Yes.
Bill Doyle.
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan.
Yes.
Chris McGuire.
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Bill Amaru.
Yes.
Did I miss anyone?
Tim Brady.
Tim's absent at present.
Thank you. Well, so approved. I really have no comments. I guess I'm going to turn this over to law enforcement. Is law enforcement on the line?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. It's Matt Bass.
Good morning, Matt.
Good morning. Sorry to be brief. I'm a bit overbooked today, so I'm can only kind of be present for this short period, and then I have to actually sign off. But in brief, it's mostly dealing with whales right now. I think the last flight in the bay saw in excess of 80. We did see a number more up in Mass Bay that I don't think were accounted for. So a good portion of the population is here. Our continuing efforts with DMF and whatnot to clear the area of gear is ongoing, and I think pretty successful. I don't know if it's a hiccup or what, but that area called the wedge that kind of always falls in between. NOAA had tried to close it, and apparently a lawsuit prevented that. So that wedge is currently open, but I think they are appealing that. So that's going to be some gear still out in that wedge area. Going back to Khalil's question, I think in the last meeting, I apologize. I think I did the count. We're at 96 officers on the books in the field right now. We have 4 more in the academy. We do have a couple promotions coming up that would take people presumably be promoted out of the field. We are, as you might know, without a colonel now. Sean Santos left. I have no details about that. Pat Moran is now the acting colonel. And we are promoting a couple of captains. With that, that's all I have, but hope to see a bunch of you this weekend at the MLA. Any questions?
Questions for Matt from the commission? Any questions?
Okay.
I have a question, Ray. Thank you. Anything more about the law enforcement, the dragger issues going land of lobsters in P-Town?
Yeah, we did hit a couple of those boats. So we did get a complaint that some draggers and then all of the scallopers were taking over limit, undersized eggers and whatnot. The complaint was a little vague. The boats we did hit, they do take pretty extensive notes on the number of lobsters. They're only allowed 100 per day and no more than 500. At that time, we didn't find any violations. Typically, where they do run afoul is they fish multiple areas where they're not endorsed for, which we can track via their VMS account. But as of now, there was no. It's we're still looking, but I think every single boat that lands in P-Town was listed as being guilty of something or another, and we haven't found that yet.
Okay, thanks.
Questions for Matt?
Khalil?
Khalil?
Thank you, Jared. Lieutenant, did one of our law enforcement officers get an award? And I don't know what the award, it's called the CLECA award. I'm reading indirectly through different emails that Joe Gray won the top award for EPO, and also he won the Shikar Safari Award. If that's so, I guess he needs some commendations.
Yeah, those are it's rare that an officer gets both the CLECA award and the Shikar Safari. And I don't have what the merits of each award are in front of me. They are different, but yeah, he was the most recent recipient of those.
What does CLECA mean?
You can always ask the stump the warden questions every time. Specifically, it does have a citation to it, and off the top of my head, I can't remember. I don't know.
I've been trying to look it up and I couldn't find it.
That I can easily find.
Regardless, congratulations to.
I will pass that along. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Questions?
Sugi, did you have a follow-up question? Were you all set? Guessing he's all set. No.
So Lieutenant Bass, I have a question. It's mandated tracking now for all harvesters of lobster, at least the trap fishermen. And I was wondering, with VMS, I don't know what the confidentiality rules are. It's probably 3. There's got to be 3 or more. How would enforcement, this is a question to both you and Dan, feel about mandating trackers on vessels otter trawlers landing lobster in the state of Massachusetts, mandating trackers on those vessels?
I think, well, so the mandate for the lobster trap fisheries only for federal permit holders and not in state only. I think so you can't drag for lobsters in state waters. So any vessel that's landing lobsters by dragging is coming in from federal waters, and they're already going to have a VMS account, so that we can, I think, effectively already track that, even though their ping rates are generally 30 minutes or 60 minutes as opposed to this robust minute ping with the state cellular system.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bass. Further questions?
Not seeing any hands raised.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Lieutenant Bass. Appreciate
You're welcome.
I'm going to turn the floor over to Commissioner O'Shea. Are you on?
Not seeing the commissioner in attendance at present.
And let's move this along to Director Dan McKiernan. We'll come back to the commissioner.
Thank you, Ray. I and my staff have been very busy over the last 1 to 2 months on some difficult shellfish issues. The first is the reclassification of many areas in the Buzzards Bay region near the wastewater treatment plant of the city of New Bedford, and as it turns out, Fairhaven as well. So we've downgraded some areas in the adjacent, including the adjacent towns. We've expanded the prohibited area around the actual outfall pipe, and this is required by the FDA under the model ordinance. So we've been having a series of meetings, not only with municipal officials, but also legislators and other stakeholders. So that's a challenging one. It's a work in progress. But what it really means for DMF is extra work, because when you downgrade an area from open to conditionally restricted, then conditionally approved, then you have to sample more often. So there's going to be a larger burden on our staff, more sampling. Instead of 5 times a year, we go monthly with a lot of these growing areas. But we're doing everything we can to minimize the impact to the existing growing areas where there's a lot of fishing, including locations where there's aquaculture. The other issue that has been very challenging is the depuration plant up at Newburyport. Day after Thanksgiving, we lost the well, and we had to shut the power off to that well. So we haven't taken any deliveries of contaminated soft shell clams. That's the only species that is depurated up at that clam plant. That clam plant's been operating for over 100 years. Used to be owned by the city of Newburyport, turned it over to us in the 60s. And that's a challenge because of coastal erosion. The well was lost because of really outrageous amounts of erosion on the coastal dune where the wellhead was. And so we've been taking a look at that, and also trying to forecast the amount of soft shell clams that are going to come into the plant based on recent history. And it's very challenging because the production or the throughput of that plant is off by over 90% in the last decade. So that's another challenging one, not just for the sake of the diggers who depend on it, but also the financial costs and working with our financial folks, and also the folks up at the Department of Fish and Game and EEA trying to figure out how and if we should reinvest in that plant. Someone had mentioned, Matt Bass mentioned the wedge closure. That was it's a little alleyway just east of the state waters line, west of Stellwagen. It was an area that was left open after we, DMF and MFAC, voted to approve the closure of state waters. And we were kind of concerned that it was becoming like a storage area for gear, that for guys didn't want to bring the gear home. So we're concerned about the possibility that a lot of gear is going to get stacked up in there during the winter months. Unfortunately, the courts ruled against NIMS that completed their rulemaking. And as Matt mentioned, the NIMS may appeal it, but for now that closure has been repealed. And so we're going to try to make sure that there's, if there is fishing there, that it's with properly marked gear. You probably heard about the right whale that came ashore in Martha's Vineyard recently, and thanks to the the buoy line marking scheme that has been in place for 2 or 3 years, we were confident that it was not Massachusetts gear. And so what we have to make sure is that, gear that's just over the line in the EEZ, whether it be in the wedge or up off Cape Ann, is also properly marked, so that, if there was an entanglement, we wouldn't be, inappropriately sort of credited or blamed for causing that entanglement within our jurisdiction. MLA annual weekend is coming up. Welcome all the commission members and any members of the public to come down. It's hosted by the Mass Lobstermen's Association, but it's a free trade show, and it's down in Hyannis at the convention center. It's always a good take, and we have usually a very lively conversation with MLA and some of its members. So looking forward to that. And finally, you'll see a public hearing coming up soon. Has to do with the lobster minimum size. ASMFC is trying to resolve some confusion about whether or not there should be a national minimum size. In other words, not just in the harvesting states, but right now there's in Magnuson, it says that the minimum size across the country, whether it be California, Colorado, or Chicago, as well as Boston, should be the smallest minimum size of any of the lobster management areas. and there was some confusion in the rulemaking record. And so we're probably going to have a public hearing on that. It's probably going to be virtual, but if any folks have any questions on that, reach out to me. But it's just like a housekeeping clarification that we do in fact think there should be a national minimum size. And this goes back to the early 90s when then Senator George Mitchell of Maine filed that bill, and it was enacted to create a national minimum size. So that's all I have. I'll take any questions, Ray, if the commission members have any.
Questions for the director?
Sookie?
Yeah,
Suki,
thank you. Yeah, Dan, another subject, but a little disappointed in the recommendation letter the DMF wrote about the decommissioning of the Suez pipeline. Lobster is a major thing that takes place in there. Probably 90% of the fishing activity in that whole corridor is lobster, and hardly got a mention. And you guys are recommending taking habitat out of there. I'm just having a hard time having habitat destroyed where, it's been in place for 20 years. I don't understand why there's a big push to have that habitat all taken out of there, especially when it shows, if you watch any of the videos, it's quite a lot of activity around some of that habitat down there. So a little disappointed in DMM, Division of Fisheries response to that pipeline recommendation.
Dan?
Yes, so that particular position that we took, we consulted with the Office of Coastal Zone Management, and the larger issue there, and I appreciate your concerns, Suki, because we all love habitat, and when you put stuff on the seafloor and it starts to get encrusted with anemones and other sea life, obviously it creates habitat. But on the flip side, this is a coastal construction project, and what we don't want is to create precedents where these construction projects can over time just keep altering the seafloor and leaving the equipment or whatever in place. And I think CZM in our conversations were concerned about a precedent, especially concerning like offshore wind, that when the offshore wind turbines get decommissioned, they'd like to see those come out. And that was what drove that. Obviously, there are interests among the mobile gear fleet that were precluded from towing in that area because of the presence of the LNG pipelines infrastructure. And, they weighed in pretty strongly on this and brought forth letters that they had written back in the, 15 to 20 years ago when this thing was being contemplated about, how this is supposed to be temporary and not a permanent permanent structure that would preclude their participation. What was so ironic is that these platforms were put up and all kinds of mitigation paid, and I don't think they ever took a single delivery. And the reason was fracking became the new technology, the new way to produce gas, and we became an exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas, whereas these were built because we were net importers at the time. So it's a really kind of twisted history to all of this, but I think it has to do with the precedent of if you're going to build stuff on the seafloor and you decommission it, you should do your best to sort of restore it to the way it was. Any other
I'm sure we'll have
questions?
more of a discussion about this. Thanks.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have a question, Dan. I thought they were gonna remove that pipeline, and the pipeline itself was a failure because the natural gas froze as they tried putting it through the pipeline from the vessel to shore. But
Yeah, Ray, I don't know that that's the case. It was my impression that they just never needed to use it because of the fast changing availability of new sources of natural gas.
okay,
But I
Thank
can
you.
look into that for you, sure.
Thank you. Questions for the director?
Not seeing any further questions, Mr. Chair.
Has Commissioner Tom O'Shea, is he online now, Jared?
Not seeing Tom in attendance.
Thank you. Well, I guess we can move right into action items. First one being the horseshoe crab management. And I want to thank Jared for getting out the public comments on a Friday so that we as commission members, we could read through the public comments prior to sending out the package for the commission today's meeting. Thank you, Jared.
No problem, Ray. There was a lot of material coming out this month and a lot of public comment, and I wanted to make sure everyone had ample
thought-
time to digest it.
Yes, thank you very much. So let's move along with the horseshoe crab management action.
Okay, Ray, we have 3 recommendations. And the first of the 3 is to enact a April 15th to June 7th spawning closure for horseshoe crabs. I want to also thank the staff for supplying me an incredible amount of information to help formulate this proposal. And, you know, the fact that we have an 8-page memo of text before you even get into the tables and figures on this particular issue is sort of testament to the complexities of this. And I think the overall importance of this for a fish or for a species that is not really, it's not present in any of our seafood markets. It's pretty extraordinary that a species like this has the incredible following that it does. And, you know, the fact that we have, you know, 2 distinct fisheries based on the disposition of bait versus biomedical. We have the public health issues with biomedical. We have a lot of historical precedent. We have cultural aspects of this. This is a really, really difficult issue, and I don't want to, you know, minimize the importance of this species and the fishery to those that might be affected by any final outcome today. But the way I see it is you know, and I think it was Chris McGuire who was talking to me when he first came on, you know, how can we make more fish? You know, you can't, well, actually, not true. Associates of Cape Cod is stocking, newly hatched horseshoe crabs. We don't know the success of that, but obviously one way that we as fishery managers routinely try to make more fish is enhancing the success of spawning and postponing harvest to maximize the spawning potential. And it's really that simple. So we're suggesting that a closure of April 15th, which should sort of protect the aggregating crabs as they gather near shore through the month of May and even into June 7th, would give us what we're estimating to be a protection of 90% of the available spawning crabs. And, you know, some might say, well, why not 100%? I think you'd be getting well into the end of June and even early July, and that would completely upset so many of the users and result in a lot of unnecessary discards, especially in the mobile gear fishery. This June 7th date does give some opportunity for hand harvesters at the tail end of the spawning season to obtain some crabs. You know, another, you know, comment has been, you know, why, you know, what's wrong with the lunar closures? And there's nothing wrong with the lunar closures. We think that we have been successful improving the status of the stock through the lunar closures, but some of the data we showed you last year at this time is that there's a fair amount of spawning that goes on outside that lunar closures. Those 5-day lunar closures. And finally, you know, the public's desires for for this agency and this commission to be more precautionary with horseshoe crabs, I think was loud and clear. And so I think it's a good way to hedge our bets against, what's happening in the future, whether that be, climate change and loss of some spawning beaches, et cetera, or the degrading of some spawning beaches. And I think we should give this a shot. I think if we approve this year, we'll be able to look at the change in the spawning beach counts. Within a few years, hopefully we'll be able to see some evidence of new recruitment. That may take five years or so. But I think we put the Luna closure in about 12 or 13 years ago. So, we're in this for the long haul. And so I would urge the commission to approve this, give it a shot. And I understand the ramifications this is going to have on the biomedical firms that are going to have to alter their business model, or even get some crabs to bleed from out of state if they want to start a production in May. I'm especially, concerned about the impacts on the hand harvesters. There's folks who've been doing this for their entire long fishing career. But I think it's the way that we should evolve in terms of managing the species. And I think just in general, the idea of removing a male and a female crab from spawning, on a spawning beach is something we should probably leave behind going forward. And so let me stop there. So we have 3 proposals. That's the first one. The second one has to do with altering the trip limits once the fishery does open from 4 to 300. Part of that is to prevent, the mad rush on this rent-a-crab fishery. We want to make sure that the crabs, as they're coming in, are going to be used by the bait markets. There is some concern about the whelk marketability this year in terms of the overseas demand. So that's kind of an open question, but you'll see that what we've got here, these automatic triggers, it's really a testament to our ability through our statistics program to look at historical landings trends and understand, when we need to make those adjustments. In past years, I've come to you, on your commission meeting schedule to tweak trip limits, and sometimes that can get a little contentious. But I think if we pre-bake these kind of mechanisms into the regulation, it's much cleaner, it's much fairer, it's easier for all the participants to be able to forecast and understand when it's going to happen, as opposed to that. And plus, when I was coming to you in past years with requests to tweak these limits, it also has to be done on sort of our schedule, right? A meeting that's already planned, and that sometimes isn't very timely relative to what the fisheries needs are. So we're going more and more and you'll see this also in striped bass, the idea of having a mechanism based in the regulation that uses quota utilization of the past to sort of forecast how we should tweak rules going into the future. I really like that. Some of the concerns among the folks who are, saw that 300, especially the dealers and the draggers, were concerned about whether or not that's going to affect their ability to limit out. We do have this 2-day limit that we're allowing the fluke draggers to participate in, where as long as the boat seals the catch from day 1, they don't have to unload the catch, and they can come in on the second day with 2 days of sort of segregated catch and sealed containers. It's a nice program in that I think it reduces the carbon footprint of the vessel. It reduces their fuel usage. It allows them to basically fish a 2-day trip, stay on the boat overnight kind of thing. And it's been super successful. And so we would be willing to add horseshoe crabs to the species that those boats would be able to do that. So in essence, it becomes a 600 crab limit for boats that are doing the 2-day trip. The draggers are pretty good about keeping horseshoe crabs alive because they can keep them in running water. Anyway, and then the third part of the proposal is to extend the in regulation are the closures that are in the federal system, that is in the refuge and the national seashore, to incorporate those as state regulations. And this allows our environmental police to enforce a state reg for that same infraction should there be any poaching. But I have to be clear, I'm not proposing this because this is has been a big enforcement issue in the past. I'm not trying to solve a poaching problem, but this particular rule just makes sense to sort of join forces, with the federal interests to protect these crabs, in those areas. And, I'll just reference the fact that our Mass Environmental Police have a joint enforcement agreement with the National Marine Fisheries Service. Don't believe there's something similar with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And so this is an analogous arrangement to something like the joint enforcement agreement that they have with NOAA. So those are the three proposals. Obviously, I really want to thank and commend the staff for all the information they provided to me to build this memo and this recommendation. We have plenty of slides that we can bring forward that we presented at the public hearings if commission members want to discuss any of these issues in more detail. So Raymond, why don't we take a few moments and allow the commission members to discuss these three items one at a time or in group? It's up to you.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, Dan, to you and Jared. Should we vote on each recommendation?
I think you can.
Yeah, I think we could take questions on the proposals as a whole, because there's probably going to be some bleed over in thinking or in discussion, but then to vote on each recommendation singularly.
Thank you, Jared. Then I'll open it up to the floor. This is gonna be questions only. We'll take comments thereafter, but let's get the questions out on the floor first. Starting with the first recommendation. So Jared, if you could bring the first recommendation back up.
Khalil, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised.
Well, I had more of a comment, so I can wait.
Thank you, Khalil. I think we can engage with comments after the question period. So are there any questions on the first recommendation?
I'm not seeing any questions.
Well, let's move along to the second recommendation. Questions?
Khalil? Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to commend Dan, the director, and his staff for once again a very comprehensive, complete explanation of the horseshoe situations and what is going on with them and in the industry. But I can understand the need for the horseshoe crab blood for the biomed. That's a national health issue. I still having a problem wrapping my head. And Dan, I need to commend Dan and I have had discussions on this. Dan is a very, very open person. He's always approachable. You can call him on a cell phone and he discusses issues with you and gives you a person a lot of time to discuss their concerns, and I truly appreciate that. But what I'm having a tough time wrapping my head around is using or killing horseshoe crabs for a whelk fishery, which has been deemed to be overfished and depleted. And I understand that we're gonna need some to kill some horseshoe crabs for that, for the bait fishery. With the international market down, we're proposing to kill, I believe, 145,000 horseshoe crabs, and I just have a tough time understanding that while we're doing that. We had a massive killing of horseshoe crabs last year, and we found out that many of those horseshoe crabs were never used for the bait market and were discarded. So I just think we need to have some discussion as to why we're continuing to propose 145,000 horseshoe crabs to be killed for a market that is questionable. And Dan and I talked about this, but this is really a concern for me.
So Dan, will you address that
Yeah,
question?
I mean, Khalil, I hear you. And I would agree that with you that it's a separate issue at this time. You know, one of the things that we've been tracking is the utilization of horseshoe crabs within Massachusetts. We use the number of trap hauls in our whelk fishery as a proxy for what we think is the amount of crabs that the Massachusetts whelk fishermen need. And we know that the number of trap hauls is down almost 60% from the high of about, I don't know, was that 8 or 9 years ago. So there's definitely a downward trend. And I think that, you know, we when we saw last year, you know, forget the dead crabs on Harding's Beach, that was just a symptom. But we were told, factually that crabs were coming in and there was no market for them, because I think if you see the memo, we had something like 77,000 crabs caught basically before May 31st. And that was more than twice the previous year. So there is some awkwardness of supply and demand that we're trying to work out, and we're trying to regulate in a responsible fashion. And I think the second recommendation from going to 4 to 300 does that. And we'll watch this really carefully, because if we find again that there's a lot of bait crabs that are being harvested and without a market, then we could come back next year and address that. We could even transfer some of those crabs over the biomedical sector if that makes sense, if there's less and less demand for these crabs. But I think I'm trying to respect the needs of the existing fishery participants, and that is the bait dealers and of course the whelk potters. But the other challenge that I have, of course, and I've brought this to the attention of the other delegations at ASMFC, is it really rankles me when I see other states claiming to be super conservative in their approaches to horseshoe crab management, yet at the same time still allow horseshoe crab bait to be used in their state when they don't allow harvest. I mean, it seems disingenuous, especially when some political officials in those states kind of call out the other states for following their lead. So I'm going to continue to watch this. And I hear you, Khalil. The upside to sort of the status quo or trying to manage as we are, this whelk fishery is in somewhat of a decline in terms of participation, because people need to make profits when they go fishing, and in the current situation, there's the whelk potters are naturally fishing later and fishing less, and so that's a natural response to the reduced profitability or the reduced abundance. But the upside is it reduces the need for these crabs. So we will watch this carefully. I appreciate your feedback on that, and I'll continue to work on this with the staff. One of the things I just want to mention, there's something called the annual Horseshoe Crab Science Meeting. Derek Perry is the host of that, and we held that last week here in New Bedford, and it was pretty well attended. I don't know, there was about over 60 people here, many from the NGOs, many harvesters as well. And I think the general consensus, people walking out of the room at the end of the session, was they couldn't believe how much work we're putting in on this species, in terms of monitoring and in the dealers, and monitoring on vessels, and doing sea sampling trips, and visiting the biomedical firms to make sure that the best management practices were being followed. We are really dedicating a lot of effort to the species, and I think the public who have a chance to see that, appreciate that. And I think there's some increased level of trust in DMF's efforts because of that. And so shout out to Derek and Tracy, and all the folks who've been working on this.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. And, the concern is we have the rent-a-crab in the biomed. Those crabs go back to the bait fishery. And I believe those crabs that go back to the bait fishery, is that part of the 145 quota?
Yes,
Yes.
140, but yes.
145,000?
No, 140, Khalil. We took
140,
25 off
140.
of 165, so it's 140.
Yeah, okay. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Yeah.
So the rent-a-crab, those crabs that are used by the biomed, and I'm not, I understand the need for until an alternative is created for the amoeba, the horseshoe crab blood. Until that, and it's going to eventually happen. There's going to be the RFC, the recombinant one. It's going to eventually happen. Maybe not in the near future, but it's going to happen eventually. But until that happens, I understand the need for the biomed, but I just think and you give me some assurance that we're going to look at this closely. That what we don't need is an abuse of the crabs for a fishery that is marginal at this point, and that's my major concern.
Okay, I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Questions on, I guess, any three of these recommendations?
I'm not seeing any further questions, Mr. Chair. So do we want to take a motion on each one and then move it to
Well,
debate?
Yeah, why don't we do that, Jared? And at that time, we can debate, so it'll be a question and comment period, I presume.
Correct. So we'll be looking for a motion on this first recommendation.
Yeah, we're looking for a motion on this first recommendation.
I'll make a motion on that to approve as presented.
Bill Doyle.
Second.
Seconded by Chris McGuire.
Seconded by Chris McGuire. Okay, let's open it up to the floor now that we have that motion up. Questions about the recommendation, comments on the recommendation? Jared?
I'm not seeing any questions or comments. Do we want to move this to a roll call vote?
Yes, by all means.
Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Abstain.
Cleo Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer.
No.
Motion passes 6-1 to 1.
And Tim
5 to
Brady,
1 to 1 rather.
yes, so Tim Brady isn't on the call at all.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
All right, next issue.
Next recommendation, Jared.
Yep, we're now to the bait trip limits, which would be to establish a uniform 300 crab trip limit for all limited entry permit holders with an automatic in-season adjustment to 400 crabs if less than 50% of the quota is taken by August 1, and a automatic decrease to 200 crabs if more than 80% of the quota is taken before September 15th.
Questions or comments?
Move for a motion.
Please.
Motion to approve as presented.
I'll
Bill
second
Doyle
it.
with a motion,
I'll second it, Jared.
seconded by Shelley Edmondson. Proceed to a roll call vote. Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Abstain.
Cleo Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer.
Yes.
Motion passes with unanimously with one abstention.
Thank you, Jared. Recommendation 3.
Its recommendation is to match the federal harvest prohibitions within the boundaries of the Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge and the Cape Cod National Seashore. Move to a motion.
I move we accept as written.
Motion made by Chris McGuire,
Need a second?
I'll
Second,
second it.
Khalil.
gonna give Shelley that one. Sorry, Khalil. So Shelley Edmondson with the second. You want to move for questions or comments, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, questions or comments, and we're not getting comment nor questions on any of these recommendations, so just
We
move
have
it to a roll
question here
call.
from Chris McGuire. Question or
Thank you,
comment?
Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't really go to comments on the last one, but the one that I wanted to make is just to say that I really strongly support the idea of automatic in-season adjustments. I think it's a really smart policy. It avoids scrambling to make regulatory changes. As the director said, it provides certainty to participants. And so I just wanted to say in the last segment that I think that's a really good idea, and it's one that I would encourage DMF to move towards in more opportunities as we can. This is going to become something that we might think about related to climate change impacts or lots of other things. And so it's just a way of adaptively managing where you make the decisions in advance and everybody knows what's going to happen. So just I wanted to voice my support for that approach.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments?
Not seeing any. We can move to a roll call vote. Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Cleo Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, commission members. It's a question comment, Dan. So by displacing these 21 beach harvesters, have we come up with any thoughts about an alternative fishery for them to engage in? Because I'm seeing numbers that, you know, it's just a part of their annual income, but it could be anywhere from $7,000 to $18,000. So have we at DMF and the commission thought of any other alternative fisheries to these
Well,
harvests?
The memo mentions, green crab harvest. I know one of the Chatham fishery participants, came to us and thought that there could be some expansion there. And we do have some permit restrictions on green crabs that I think has been misinterpreted by some members of the public. We have a season and we have like a modest, trap limit, but we only put those on there because we didn't want people abandoning their gear all winter. And we wanted to have the opportunity to remove the gear as lost or abandoned during the winter months. And so I'd certainly be willing to, modify, whatever, rules we're putting on that. It's an invasive species. But, the challenge there is markets, and it's not clear, if we unleash 21 guys fishing full time like they might on horseshoe crabs to green crabs, if the markets could bear that. But I think it's worth pursuing at some level. Many of these same fishermen also do shell fishing at other times of the year. But if there are harvesters who live in a town that doesn't have an open shellfish fishery or a lucrative shellfish fishery, I don't have at my disposal, an ability to grant new fishing opportunities on like underutilized species. But I'm certainly in a frame of mind to try to help in that regard. So, but I don't have an instant answer that would replace that income, Ray.
Okay, thank you for your response. I know there's one restaurant up on the North Shore serving green crabs, and apparently there's a Wolf Seafood Company, I believe they are, or Wolf. They're looking for a national distribution on green crabs. So that's one thought. And I was going to ask the commissioner if he was on, being how they are an invasive species, if Department of Fish and Game could come up with a bounty to pay the harvesters. So if there is no edible, fish market for these, or there's a glut, that the state would step in and pay harvesters. It was just a thought.
Ray, let me give you some insights. Story Reed, can you comment on or even Bob, I don't know, Bob Glenn. Bob, why don't you speak to the bounty program that's been going on up in the Great Marsh north of Gloucester that's been legislatively funded?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Dan. So there's been a legislative earmark now, and I'd have to ask Kevin to tell me how many years. It's been probably, I would guesstimate about a decade we've been doing that, whereby all the towns up on the North Shore can qualify for a grant from DMF to administer a green crab depredation program. And essentially how that's worked is that towns pay harvesters a price per pound for those crabs, and then the harvesters are also allowed to go ahead and then sell those crabs to any markets that they can find, which would include some distribution to the Cape for the whelk fishery, as well as seasonal distribution for, as live bait for tautog. And so the combination of what they can sell them for, which is fairly modest, in addition to the price that the town pays for on the bounty, can make it profitable fishing, especially whereby that you can get really large volumes of the green crabs. And that program has been going on, as I said, I think for about a decade, and I believe there are 5 municipalities who participate in it, and it's been fairly popular and moderately successful. I would say certainly it's green crabs are a tough issue. We certainly don't have evidence that we put a substantial debt in them. That said, without that program, who knows to the extent to which they would proliferate. So we definitely would like to continue to, that program and try to work on the green crab issue. And, as Dan said, I think there is potential here, provided that we can find funding to expand a program like that down on the Cape, because certainly green crabs are an issue there.
Thanks, Bob. Hey,
Bob,
Ray,
Bob.
can I ask Story Reed to talk about seafood marketing programs that we've funded for green crab product development?
Yes, I only have a comment. I'd like to make a comment. I would like to thank Bob Glenn for his insight. And secondly, Bob, you could probably answer this. When we call them an invasive species, they feed on our clams and oysters, don't they?
They do, and they're largely attributable to kind of broad scale declines in softshell clam populations in New England, including Maine, where they're considered to be the primary culprit for declines in softshell clam populations, as well as in Massachusetts, where we know, and they really raise havoc on softshell clam beds. So there's definitely, and again, with climate change, with increasing water temperatures, historically, what we've seen is that their populations were somewhat kept in check because in wintertime, ice scouring, especially up in the Great Marsh up on the North Shore, would kind of keep their populations in check. But with warmer climates, we don't have that type of freeze over and ice scouring that we used to have. So their populations have really boomed. And so yeah, we definitely are in favor of doing whatever we can to put a dent in them.
Thank you very much, Bob. Okay, I guess we'll move on to Story unless somebody has a question for Bob Glenn before we move on to Story Reed. Any questions for Bob?
Well, I have a comment.
Bill?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. I have to say that the level of impact from green crabs is, even though Bob's done a good job of describing, is underestimated. This is a program in a need that is so far gone with minimal amount of input. Soft shell clams, mussels, numerous other types of shellfish in the estuaries on Cape Cod are suffering incredibly high mortality due to green crab. And the populations are far greater than what I think anyone understands. What fishing has taken place has resulted in crab pots overnight so full that literally another crab couldn't fit inside them. And the market issues have been the reason that it hasn't been more fully utilized in a way that could possibly lower the population to fit in, since they're here to stay with a population of soft shell and other kinds of shellfish that could support a balance. So I'm very much in favor of everything that's been said about development of a program, including a bounty program. And I hope in the future, as the issue with horseshoe crabs becomes a greater and greater concern on the bait side of it, that these can take the place, at least partially, for that fishery as it goes into a sunset, which appears to be in the works. No, those are my comments, and I want to tell you that the soft shell fishery in the areas of the Nauset estuary in Eastham and Orleans and down into the Chatham zones are severely in decline and virtually non-existent because of the result of all the points that were made. The scouring of the ice, we virtually have we don't even have freshwater ice anymore. If it isn't obvious to everyone by now that there are substantial changes that are going on, and that if we don't get out ahead of some of them, we're going to lose the people who do this for work, and we're going to lose the resource itself, which is going to be a sad statement to make about our New England future for commercial shell fishing. Well, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Dan, I presume we will talk about this at a later meeting, but these 21 harvesters that I referred to, we have their historical landings, and we could discuss it down the road when we bring green crab back up for a discussion item or an action item. In getting these harvesters access to the different towns on the Cape. So as Bill just mentioned, they've got a tremendous green crab problem in Orleans. I don't know how many horseshoe crab harvesters we have in Orleans, but overall we've got 21 who are being displaced. So that's something that can be addressed at another meeting, I presume, or in conversation.
Sure. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Do you want Story just to briefly mention what we've done for horseshoe green crab promotion? Go ahead, Story.
Please, Story.
Okay, I would say over the past 5 to 7 years, we've funded a handful of small and medium grants for a variety of different green crab projects, everything from recipe development to bringing expertise from Europe on how to identify soft-shell green crabs, essentially as when they're going to molt, sort of using techniques that are already used in Europe. And all these efforts have sort of, I think they've made a difference. And there's now a group in Massachusetts called greencrab.org that is really focused on marketing green crabs, promoting recipes. So there is a movement that's going on. And, maybe at a future meeting, we could bring somebody in from that group to talk about some of the progress that's been made outside of our grants. Might be interesting to hear.
Yeah, you're muffled, Story.
Okay.
So we picked it up.
Okay.
Thank you, Story. Any other comments, Dan, that you'd like your staff to make?
No.
Okay, and how is Tyler Perry feeling about the horseshoe crab population?
Who's Tyler Perry?
Gentleman who works on horseshoe crabs. I thought his last
Oh,
name.
Derek Perry?
I'm sorry.
Well, there is a stock assessment that's going on now, and I think it's going to be released next month at the ASMFC spring meeting.
Okay.
And so I think we'll learn more. If you want, we could have Derek present at a future business meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to thank the commission. This has been a difficult subject matter for quite a while. I know for commission members, for DMF, and the public. And hopefully we'll have enough blood so when people go in for surgeries or even get an injection, they'll know they're getting safe injections and safe surgery instruments. And that's international. Let's move on to commercial striped bass fishing days and primary purchase requirements.
Okay, Ray, this is a pretty straightforward one. In response to last year's early closure, which is in the first week of August, which we think is too early to capitalize on enhanced revenues or potential revenues because the demand tends to be higher in August. In response to that, I mean, if all things were equal, I think we would still be coming to you with a way to try to extend this fishery in terms of the season. But more importantly, there was a 7% reduction in the quota for this year and going forward. And so our quota for this year is about 684,000. So we are proposing to reduce the number of fishing days from 3 to 2, and then with a trigger mechanism, as Chris McGuire just described, because we have a pretty good handle at the rate that these landings tend to come in, and if there's some kind of an anomaly, we can without action, based on the seasonality of the catch, of the aggregated catch, cumulative catch, we can allow those trip limits to go up at a date certain. And so the proposal is to go to 2 days a week. And then on August 1st, if more than 30% of the quota remains available, automatically at a third day. The second question, or the question that came up is, well, right, because right now we have a 3-day fishery. Do you have a day off between open fishing days, or do you just keep them together? And there's a trade-off there. If you have a day off in between your fishing days, you still have some of those challenges of having the vessel operators racing in before the midnight hour to unload this fish, and it can be kind of a public safety problem with fishermen running late or running against the tide and not being as careful or as deliberate as they should be. And so alternatively, if you have the back-to-back days, then you're allowing that fishing, at least on the overnight, to be happening and to allow the fishermen to sell, in the morning, at their convenience kind of thing. So, the trade-off there is, if we're really uptight about making absolutely sure that the 15 fish per 24-hour day is adhered to, then we probably would prefer that those 2 days separated by a no fishing day. In my opinion, I think we're better off having the consecutive days. I think it allows the night fishing to occur, and increasingly as the striped bass stocks have kind of trended, or our fishery have trended toward our more northern part of the state during the time period of the commercial fishery, late June through the summer. That seems to be the way that people are fishing. So that is the recommendation, to go 2 consecutive days, Tuesday and Wednesday. And should there be 30% of the quota left on August 1st, add a 3rd day.
Questions for the director?
Khalil?
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Dan and I have talked about this on the phone also. I'm curious, I need a scenario. If it's 2 consecutive days and a person's fishing from 12 a.m. Tuesday and he catches his limit, the person still has to leave his, and if I'm assuming that the angler, the fisherman, has to be the person who's bringing the striped bass to the primary buyer. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. It's on an owner operator fishery.
Yeah.
So a commercial fisherman can assign those family member or another friend to take those bass to the primary buyer?
They would have to have the permit in their possession. So, yeah, because this is not an owner operator fishery, a father could let his son take the boat out, and as long as that boat permit was in the possession of the, with somebody's name on it, then they could show up at the dealer with those fish.
So regardless of whether it was 2 consecutive days or 2 or a day in between, Tuesday, Thursday, let's say, the person still has to come to shore to get those bass to the primary buyer. I'm curious, well, the primary buyer, if it's 2 consecutive days, is the primary buyer going to be open for 48 straight hours so that he can accommodate the striped bass fishermen, or we're trying to get away from?
Yeah, if the fishery opens at Tuesday at 12:01 a.m.,
right,
then the buyer doesn't have to be open. He can open as normal, like 7 a.m. On Tuesday, and then fishing that goes on over at in the nighttime, Tuesday going into Wednesday, that dealer could take those fish on Wednesday morning. Like, you're not forcing them to plan by midnight.
No, if a person, what I'm not understanding, if once that Tuesday 24-hour period is up, or once that the commercial fisherman gets his 15 fish and brings them to the market on Tuesday sometime during that he's done for the day.
Yeah, that's right.
So and then he can't start fishing until 12:01 on Wednesday.
That's right.
All right. It would be interesting to find out, and it's too bad that Lieutenant Bass can't be here. It'd be interesting to find out which of the 2 scenarios they would prefer. I've heard from a law enforcement officer who does the enforcement up here in the North Shore. He said to me, he personally thought it would be easier for enforcement if it were a day was separated. In other words, Tuesday, Thursday. And he felt it would be easier. What's to prevent front loading on a Tuesday evening, Tuesday night, before the Wednesday opening at 12:01.
So Khalil, I think if you recall back to the striped bass focus group meeting we had, there wasn't a uniform opinion among law enforcement. I think Joe Gray, who's probably the North Shore officer you're referring to, was pretty adamant that he liked separate days, whereas the rest of the folks from law enforcement on the call had a differing perspective, including Lieutenant Bass. I think front loading is an issue whether the fishing day is open or not. They saw a lot of front loading last year on Sundays, which was a closed fishing day, for the Monday market. And, by eliminating Mondays, we're hoping we get rid of some of that front loading, because the likelihood is front loading is probably more significant on a weekend day, given that some folks who do participate in this fishery may have weekday jobs, and Sundays give them like one day to get out and get fish to the market before they go to work on Monday. But I think front loading is an issue regardless of how we sequence our commercial fishing days. By having them back to back, some amount of night fishing occur between days, rather than having a strict prohibition on it.
I understand, and I'm in favor of your recommendation. I was just trying to get a handle on the 2 consecutive or the alternate days, Tuesday, Thursday. Which one?
Yeah, I think it's a trade-off. There's going to be some level of front loading regardless of when the fishery occurs. It's just, do we want to accommodate night fishing to occur on one day, or to force that fishing not to begin until 12:01 a.m. each day.
Okay, and then as long as we can eliminate the dropping fish off at the primary buyer, I feel it's important that the primary buyer guarantee that they're going to be able to get those fish and tag them.
Yeah, that's the next recommendation.
Okay, all right, thanks. Dan.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, questions on this particular recommendation? Comments?
Not seeing any further questions. Do we want to?
Jared, I have one suggestion here. When you're talking about Tuesday and Wednesday, in parentheses, maybe behind Tuesday, because in public comment, I saw a lot, well, why don't they open it up at 6 a.m. Tuesday morning? So in parentheses, if we're going to move this recommendation, I'd like to see, and I'm hearing midnight, 12:01 a.m. to 11:59, and on Wednesday, 12:01 a.m. to 11:59.
Okay.
Yeah, Ray, that is, I am intrigued by the potential to accommodate like morning landings, but I think the comments that we had were just so mixed that, like a lot of things we do in regulation, sometimes we get it through the second, third, or fourth time. But I think for now, I think we want to stick with the traditional 12:01 to 11:59 in back-to-back days. And, we can continue conversations with the participants over this season and see if something else makes sense.
Yes, I'm just suggesting that it be in the recommendation if the commission's going to vote it up. That's all I'm suggesting.
Right. Well, it is in the recommendation, right?
Yeah, I just added the hours to the recommendation.
Okay. Smart. Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, no
Thank
problem.
you, Jared.
So, Mr. Chair, do we want to vote on this now, or do we want to move to the second striped bass recommendation
Let's
and then
vote
go
on these
back and?
recommendations, Jared, as you put them up so nobody's confused and
Okay.
get mixed up in the recommendations, please. So we need a motion. Somebody, anybody, anyone, my commission
Motion
member?
to approve is presented.
Bill Doyle with the motion.
Thank you. I need a second.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mike Pearnock.
Thank you, Michael.
Any
Is
further
Is
debate?
there anybody opposed?
Well, we gotta do a roll call vote, so
Okay, thank you, Jared.
if there's no further debate, Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer. Suki,
Yes.
thank you. All right, next recommendation.
Thank you, commission members. Thank you, Jared.
All right, this is an interesting one. It's part of this trend of the fishery kind of drifting to the north. When it was primarily focused on the Cape, most of the fish were being delivered to a waiting truck. But as the fishery moves north, there's more fish houses, that are available that you can deliver direct to. And we found that there are some, fish houses that were accepting or accepting fish in absentia. Basically, the commercial fisherman was dropping the fish off, without the dealer being present, and also tagging the fish weren't being weren't being tagged or being tagged by the harvester. And right now, our regulations require the dealers to tag them. So this is just sort of like a housekeeping measure. But it's something that we're working with those North Shore dealers on, and our conversations with them is that they've agreed to staff those locations like later in the night. So in this example, Khalil, you were just kind of trying to figure out these scenarios. If the fishery starts Tuesday at midnight, goes into Tuesday all day, that they'd have to have somebody available, like, let's say by midnight on the second day, but they wouldn't necessarily have to have someone on that midnight of the first day, unless they're working with those particular harvesters because they want to race out again the next day. But it'd be up to the dealers and the fishermen to kind of work that out, to collaborate to make it work. But the net result is, what we're saying is, hey, fishermen, don't be leaving fish unattended because there's no chain of custody. And secondly, hey, buyers, you got to be present and you got to tag those fish. So work this out. Please cooperate with us. So it's pretty common sense, but I'll take any questions if you want. But it's not really a deviation per se. It's just a clarification.
Yes, Dan, and also this is mandated by ASMFC, tagging upon the
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, and it's tough we're figuring out, like, was this fish sold? Because it's just sitting there at the closed dealer. So we just want to fix that.
Khalil?
Thank you, Jared. I just want to be sure that, it would be illegal to have a possession of 30 fish if a person doesn't come in on time for the Tuesday drop off. If the person decided to
Right.
hold on to them until Wednesday morning and then continue fishing on Wednesday for the next 15, that would be illegal. Is that correct?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Questions, comments on this recommendation?
Not
I
seeing
got a
any further questions.
I got a question, Ray.
Suki, you're recognized.
Sorry, Mike. I still can't figure out the raise hand thing. But this includes trucks at boat ramps and stuff too, right? Because they just have a driver there, but he's gonna have to tag the fish also.
Yeah, that happens now. The problem we ran into is more when the harvester was driving the product to the dealer or pulling up at the wharf and the dealer was closed. So most truck drivers, when they're receiving the fish, they're already tagging them pretty regularly. We haven't seen any challenges with that.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. There was a challenge several years back when we first went to this, both in terms of, the folks getting comfortable with how to tag the fish and also the fact that our trip limits, I believe, were double. I think we had a 30 fish trip limit back then, and a lot of those boats were maxing out on a daily basis, and it kind of created an administrative issue for the truck drivers on the Cape. After speaking to at least one of the prominent dealers on this, they're already tagging at receipt, so this wouldn't be maybe a new requirement, but it wouldn't be a change in their practice. They've been able to manage doing that since they've gone down since the trip limit's been dropped and there's less fish coming in.
Okay.
You good,
thank you.
Sue?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Jared, I guess if there's no other recommendations or comments, questions about this recommendation, comments or questions, you can move to a roll call.
Yeah, we need a motion.
I'll move the question. I'll move it, Amaru.
Thank you, Bill. Seconded by,
I can second it, Ray.
thank you, Shelley.
Mike Peardnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes,
Coyle Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Ray,
Next
I have a-
recommendation.
Ray, quick question.
Yes, Bill, you recognize.
What provision does the fisherman have if he lands his fish and all of a sudden he doesn't have a buyer?
Dan?
I don't know, Bill.
It happens.
Yeah,
Is there some type of notification that the fisherman can make to EPO or DMF so that, because there are instances
Yeah.
where this happens?
well, I can give you another scenario where, a buyer has called us and, like a truck broke down or something, right? And they couldn't get the fish in. So, we've been willing to accommodate that but if it was like 11:59 on Wednesday night and someone, they didn't have a buyer, I guess they could reach out to us and, I guess the next morning and seek some kind of an exemption or some kind of dispensation. That, obviously, if it's dead fish, we wanted to count against the quota. I would recommend if that happens, that folks on a Thursday morning, just reach out to us and we'll try to work with them. But, we work with the dealers when that happens, but I've never heard that happen to a commercial fisherman. But if it does, yeah, work with us. We in the environmental police, we're reasonable, and last thing we want to have is that fish not count against the quota, right? So we want it to count against the quota in the name of conservation. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, so could this be addressed at a meeting down the road with a recommendation from DMF on how we're gonna deal with that? For the harvester who trailers his boat, and I've heard different harvesters say, well, I'm not selling to this guy anymore because, I can get a better price elsewhere. But I think that's the crux of this problem.
Ray, I think that this happens so infrequently that we could handle it administratively on a case-to-case basis without having to accommodate that specifically in a regulation and create a loophole, a potential loophole that we have to go back and address at a future time. I think we can, when this does happen, we can address it on a case-by-case basis and work with the harvesters or dealers.
Thank you, Jared. Other questions or comments on this recommendation?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Commission members,
Well,
need a motion?
would you like an introduction to the Menhaden recommendation first, Mr. Chair?
By all means, Nicola.
All right,
Good
thank
morning.
you. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning, everyone. And I'll give Dan's voice a short break and cover Menhaden. So the division has 3 recommendations for the Menhaden season and trip limits. These are all responding to the experience of the 2023 fishery, where the nearshore availability of Menhaden was different than the prior years on which we had designed the most recent quota management approach. So these are looking to build in some more flexibility to allow the fishery to take the quota under a wider range of resource availability. These are all supported by industry at the public hearing. And so 2 of them look at some additional automatic triggers like we've been talking about, and 1 looks at the season. So specifically, the first recommendation is to replace the current June 15th start date for the purse seine fishery with a May 15th start date. We acknowledge that this is gonna, have the potential for an earlier quota closure potentially, but we have all those automatic triggers built in that are meant to slow down the quota use if needed. But the industry comment was really on prioritizing taking the quota this year rather than prioritizing, season length. So that responds to that, as does the second recommendation, which we did by an in-season adjustment last year, but this would waive the 50% quota use trigger that normally drops the limited entry trip limit down from 120,000 pounds to 25,000 pounds. So we would waive that trigger and the trip limit drop if that doesn't occur until after August 31st. The reason for that trip limit drop is to slow down the rate of the landings if they're coming in quickly and prolong the season. But if we get to August 31st without hitting 50% of the quota, there's no need to do that trip limit reduction. As part of that, though, we would clarify that Friday would remain a closed day if that 120,000 pound trip limit stays in place into September. The last recommendation is one that was not part of the initial public hearing proposal, but came out of the public hearing. It responded to the situation last year where we still had about 75% of the quota deep into the season, and the fishery has left Massachusetts waters at that point. But there are harvesters that are state permitted, and if the trip limit were high enough, they would find it economically feasible to land fish in Massachusetts that had been harvested, for example, in federal waters off of New Jersey. So this would add another conditional date of October 15th to increase the trip limit to 360,000 pounds if 10% of the quota or more still remains after October 15th. Because that is a large trip limit, though, we would require that these vessels give DMF a 48-hour notification prior to making a landing, just to make sure that we don't end up with a large quota overage from multiple vessels trying to do this at the same time. So there was one public hearing proposal that we are not moving forward with, and that would have put a kind of a pause on the fishery if the 50% quota use trigger occurred very quickly. That didn't have support at public comment. It was felt that kind of changing the trip limit from high to low and medium didn't fit well with the fishery operations to have to do that. And then the last issue that we heard about a lot at the public hearing was also the user group conflict in Boston Harbor, and particularly that we've discussed with this commission before. And we have on the calendar a meeting next week where some of the Menhaden seiners, some of the charter boat operators that we've been talking to about this issue, and several of our commission members have been invited to attend that as well, and that's going to take place in Salem to continue to discuss those issues and see if there are any areas of agreement that could possibly help to abate some of that conflict that's occurring right now.
So questions or comments on this recommendation?
I got a
Bill
question.
Yeah. I have a comment. This
Bill,
is one
you're
of the two fisheries I have no experience in, so I feel a little reluctant to make any comments about the ideas that go into this. However, I got to say, 360,000 pounds when the previous high quota limit for possession was 120,000 pounds just scares me. I'm not exactly sure why. It just seems like such an enormous number. I would hope that somehow there would be a means by which all that fish could be handled in such a way that it would still be of use to someone in the fisheries that would utilize it. Bait, I'm supposing, would be most of it. It's just a very large number, and that's all. I'm assuming that you've done the science on it, you've done the economics, and you feel that this is a number that can be utilized, that landed into our ports and not create some kind of either backlog or spoilage that might be something we would regret down the road. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, if I could respond to that, those are good points. And it is an extraordinarily high trip limit, but you know, part of our quota that we have in Massachusetts was attributable to the fact that there was a boat. In fact, the boat owner who proposed this was the same, owned that same boat at the time. Came up from, I think, somewhere in the EEZ off of New Jersey, and landed in Massachusetts. And so this is a situation where, you know, that's a company that has the capacity to freeze, but it is a long distance to travel back to Massachusetts, where, you know, if we have quota, he's certainly willing to do that, especially if the quotas are filled in some of the Mid-Atlantic states. And this is just us kind of, you know, opening the doors to let that fish come in against the quota, but it is definitely going to go into frozen storage. And that is part of the theme of these regulations. We're trying, much like the biomedical, you know, crab and bait crab fishery we talked about an hour ago, we're trying to accommodate the lobsterman's needs for sort of fresh bait in season with that 25,000 pound trip limit, with also trying to satisfy the other the other need for processed fish, meaning whole frozen boxes of fish that go into the deep freezer and sometimes can sit there for many months and are servicing bait needs year round. And so I take your point, but I'm quite confident that we wouldn't be looking at a situation with a lot of wasted fish. In fact, it's probably going to avoid and overages by having this generous trip limit for a boat that is fishing well offshore in late season.
Thank you, Dan. I hear your explanation and I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Yes, so Dan, the way I'm reading this recommendation, the 120,000 pound trip limit is in effect starting May 15th, and that 360,000 pound trip limit kicks in October 15th, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm glad. I know at one point you were talking June 1, and I suggested to staff they may even think May 1, because I know last year the menhaden were thick off of the vineyard in late April. And we all know in all fisheries, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so I'm happy with the recommendation, and hopefully they'll have a fishery this year to maintain the bait market for the lobstermen, being how we lack mackerel and herring. Thank you. Questions?
Like Piernock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dan and DMF. I'm in support of this proposal, and it's positive that there's going to be a meeting next week with the the for-hire fleet and the commercial fleet. I think it's positive that they can sit down and both can explain how they fish, where they fish, and what possibly can be done to avoid those conflicts. The conflict, user group conflict avoidance, which we're trying to address here, I do have a little bit of concern because now we're going from June 15th to May 15th with an earlier starting date. And, you know, Mr. Amaru pointed out the 360,000 pound threshold as of October 15th. That's going to result in more effort that could result in additional conflicts. So I have my concerns, but I look at this meeting as a first step to hopefully discuss and get an understanding of what could possibly work for both to minimize those conflicts. And then I guess we'll just see where we go from there based upon that meeting and how such is experienced on the water. But ultimately, I do support this proposal. Thank you.
Mike, interestingly, at that Gloucester public hearing, I think, you know, there was a lot of comment from the for-hire fleet from Boston on that earlier start date. And while it wasn't unanimous support, I think there was, you know, a good amount of consensus to have that fishery start earlier in the hopes of there being less fishing effort later in the summer when their striped bass fishing starts to, you know, their for-hire businesses start to heat up. And on the October, I think the thinking with that October 15th start date was that, you know, by that time, the pogies have migrated out of most of our waters and they're, you know, moving towards the mid-Atlantic. And that would allow, you know, the offshore boats or the larger boats to bring that up if there was quota available here. So I think the thinking of having that start on October 15th rather than September 1st was to, you know, have it occur after the fish migrate out.
Thank you, Jared.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, if I could add.
By all means, Michael.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Jared. You know, getting back to that powwow next week and that discussion, I'll give you, for instance, May 15th is the start date. May 11th is a winter flounder tournament in the harbor. The dates don't conflict, but they're the kind of things that could add to the discussion with whether we're having tournaments or different activities or so on, and how then possibly each user group could do or try to avoid one another and minimize impacts. But I hear you, I understand, and as I said, I will approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions or comments?
Khalil.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Just curious as to, just a quick question about how many commercial boats are we talking about altogether, permitted boats? From Massachusetts, that is.
There's about 10 or so that participate in the limited entry fishery.
Yeah, and only a subset of that have the inshore net permit that allows them to fish inside places like Boston Harbor or Gloucester Harbor. I think there's probably only 3 or 4 of those boats that are active.
Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Not seeing anything else, Mr. Chair.
I got a question, Jared.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, I see all the triggers. So if the overage doesn't come, you know, the quota's not caught. It's already in the regulations about when the quotas do get caught, what they go down to? I don't see any of that
Correct.
stuff here.
Yeah, 50. So that's already in the regulation, and that would be a 50% quota use. It goes to 25,000 pounds, and then provided that happens before September 1, and that at 90% quota use, it goes down to 6,000 pounds, provided that happens before October 15th.
Okay, Jared, thanks for that.
Yep.
So we ready to move with the motion?
I'm not seeing any further questions or comments, so yes.
Yes, need a motion.
I'll make a motion, Ray. Suki.
Thank you, Suki. Seconded by,
I'll second it. Khalil here.
thank you, Khalil.
I'll call the roll. Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle, Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, Jared. Moving
All right,
on to summer flounder trip limits.
Yeah, I'm gonna be handling the next few. So I'll start with summer flounder. With the large quota cut coming this year and reviewing fishery performance over the last few years, we decided to move forward several recommendations affecting summer flounder trip limits for this current season and next year as well, since we're expecting a similar quota in 2025. First would be for the period one fishery, which is ongoing, which is January 1 through April 22nd, to decrease the trip limit from 10,000 pounds to 5,000 pounds. If you recall back to our November commission meeting, we did this for 2024 by in-season adjustment, and this would then codify this as regulation for 2025 as well. And this trip limit goes down from 5,000 to 100 pounds automatically once we anticipate that the 30% allocation is reached. This year, that happened at the end of the first week of February, allowing for about 6 weeks at that higher trip limit before reducing. And we were a bit conservative in calling it, and we ended up with, between 25 and 30% of the quota being taken. And once we call it, landings generally slow down as lots of those boats are permitted in multiple states, and they'll turn their effort to other states with open quotas. So it really is just a small bycatch that may be coming in during the remainder of the season. And the preference among the industry is to take those fish earlier in the season than later in the season, because the price is generally better. So there was support for that action. For the summertime fishery, while the quota is being reduced, when we looked at fishery performance in recent years, it didn't seem as it was such that it would require us to reduce the trip limits. We did some projections, which I have here, that show that, with fishery performance the way it was the recent years, that we likely wouldn't achieve the period two allocation of about 420,000 pounds, which is actually probably going to be more north towards 450,000 pounds this year. Under status quo regulations, even if there were a 20% increase in harvest, say due to increased participation, largely because most boats that are participating in this fishery aren't taking up to the 600-pound trip limit, or for trawlers, or 400-pound trip limit for hook and line fishers. So we're not recommending any change to the trip limits, but we are recommending some quota use triggers to automatically adjust the trip limits should fishery performance be more robust than we anticipate. That would be if 75% of the quota is taken before August 1st, we'd reduce the trip limit down to 400 pounds for net fishers and 250 pounds for hook fishers, with the goal of keeping that fishery open through August and into September. And then for the fall fishery, the October to December 31 fishery, we're looking to increase the quota use threshold from 5% to 10% for triggering the elevated 5,000-pound trip limit. And that's just to avoid a quota overage. If there's too small of a quota remaining, we don't want to run an overage that would affect the amount of fish we have available for the following year. We'd also be moving the fall trip limit down from 10,000 pounds to 5,000 pounds, consistent with what we're recommending in the period one wintertime fishery. on the summer fishery and other action we're going to take that doesn't require a commission vote is to renew that consecutive daily trip limit program where trawlers can, fish 2 days in a row and land fish consistent with 2-day limits. So that would allow them to land, 1,200 pounds of fluke during the open season, and include other species like horseshoe crabs, whelk, black sea bass, and potentially smooth dogfish in that as well. So I'll take any questions or comments. Khalil?
Thank you, Jared. How confident are we with the current assessment for the stock? But apparently the stock has had poor recruitment, I believe, since, if I remember correctly from reading it, 2011. We're reacting to this. I'm in favor of for sure of the proposal, but I'm just curious as to how accurate the current stock assessment is and how we got to that number.
I'm gonna kick that question to Nicola.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, so the last assessment did, provide kind of a different trajectory for the summer flounder stock. There had been a recent year class or two that preliminarily had looked to be on the higher side, and then with another couple of years of data that didn't pan out. So the projection had been, declining biomass, which is why both the commercial quota and the recreational harvest limits have been cut for the species this year. So that is responding to the most recent stock assessment. I believe it's going to be another year or two before we have the next stock assessment.
So
to see if these cuts do as they're intended to end overfishing and put the stock back towards a positive trajectory.
Okay, thank you, Nicola.
Questions, comments?
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. I got to admit, when I first saw the numbers last year, when we began this discussion, I was scared, shocked, otherwise just confused. But as time has gone by and the analysis has come out and the explanations followed that, I see where this particular plan is going to be a benefit without sacrificing a great deal for anyone. And it'll ensure, we all hope, as Khalil just pointed out, that we'll have growth in the resource, and the fishery will respond accordingly. So speaking to some of the fishermen that I know here on the Cape, I think everybody's in agreement that this is something that we needed to do and is acceptable.
Thank you, Bill.
Not seeing any further questions or comments, Mr. Chair. Want to move for a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Yeah, okay, and I'll second Shelley.
So we've got Shelley Evanson and Bill Amaru.
I'll call the roll. Mike Peardnock.
Yes.
Bill Doyle.
Yes.
Bill Amaru.
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan.
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Chris McGuire.
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
All right. Next recommendation. Adjusting the May groundfish closure. So the recommendation here is to reduce the spatial footprint of the May groundfish closure in Mass Bay by moving the southern boundary north from Boston at 42 degrees 20 minutes north to Nahat at 42 degrees 25 minutes north. This is based on a request from a State Waters gill netter to provide additional soft bottom access for flatfish during May, particularly once the gill net closure to protect right whales is lifted. The request we received a similar request previously from this gill netter to move that line up to 4230, which would be Marblehead, and we denied it based on the presence of the cod spawning aggregation on Eagle Ridge within the waters off Marblehead. This would avoid this more nominal adjustment would avoid exposing that spawning cod aggregation to harvest during this time period. We believe there's ample subcomponent available to accommodate additional harvest. And notably, we did receive, on the discussion of state waters groundfish management, a request from some of the trawl fishers, both in Cape Cod Bay and in Mass Bay, to consider a pilot program similar to what we do for summer flounder down south of the Cape in the summer, that multi-day program, to consider that for the state waters groundfish fishery north of Cape Cod for very similar reasons, to increase their efficiency. They're often steaming large, for an extensive period of time back and forth to port every day. To reduce that steaming time would make them more efficient, and reduce overheads, costs associated with fuel consumption, particularly given the price of flatfish is remains rather low. And that's, one of the primary species that are being targeted would be yellowtails and winter flounder. We also prefer this to potentially increasing trip limits, because increased trip limits would require, at least for winter flounder, approval by the ASMFC. And there were a number of concerns raised the last time we raised trip limits for winter flounder at the ASMFC about doing that. So we think that this is a way to accommodate that fishery, and it's something we have to do a little bit more homework on, but they will get back to you on an exact answer, but it's something that we're looking to be able to do for this fall when that fishing activity generally ramps up again once the summer flounder fishery closes. So the recommendation is to reduce the spatial footprint of that May closure, but also giving you guys a heads up that we'll be considering consecutive daily trip limit for GE permit holders later this year. Take any questions or comments? Not seeing any questions, Mr. Chair, if you want to move for a motion.
By all means.
I'll make a motion, Jared.
Suki with the motion,
Seconded by,
I'll second it.
thank you, Bill.
I'll
Roll
call the
call
roll.
vote.
Mike Piernock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Okay,
Moving on to commercial mackerel trip limit for state waters.
Sure. So the recommendation here is similar to what we proposed at public hearing, which is to adopt a 5,000 pound trip limit for state waters for the mackerel fishery, and reduce that trip limit to 2,500 pounds once 80% of the quota is taken. That's consistent with what's allowed in the federal open access fishery. What is different from our public hearing proposal is that we want to exempt weir fishers from the state waters trip limit. And that responds to a public comment received at the Gloucester hearing, that the weirs may occasionally encounter mackerel in quantities that would exceed that 5,000 pound trip limit. And the dealer record, the safest records bear that out. These instances are sporadic, and they've become less sporadic over the past 5 or so years. But it's still possible that could occur. And given the restrictions on weir operators needing to be locally permitted and state permitted, and we don't see that as an area that's going to be a gateway for increasing fishing effort on mackerel. It's likely just going to accommodate the occasional catch of large quantities of mackerel in this gear, rather than forcing them to not land that fish. So that's the recommendation. Dan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, Jared, for the commission and the public, I just want to clarify that the second bullet, which talks about 80% of the annual quota is taken. Just want folks to know that this is not a Massachusetts quota, unlike everything else we've done this morning, where they are all Massachusetts specific quotas, but my understanding that this is the annual quota for that the feds are going to manage to, and we're going to basically take on a similar schedule with similar trip limits.
Yes, Dan, so the overall quota established by the Mid-Atlantic is what? Over 1 million pounds, or it was reduced from what, 13 million pounds?
I'd be looking for some help from Melanie on that, or Nicola, but Melanie, are you on? Nick?
I'd have to look up the numbers.
Thank you.
But I'm just emphasizing that this is a different quota concept than the horseshoe crab and summer flounder and striped bass, where the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is handed a share of the pie, and it's our job to manage it the most efficient and beneficial way. This is us kind of collaborating with NIMS and the Mid-Atlantic Council and adopting comparable limits on a overall federal quota.
Thank you, Dan.
Bill Amaru?
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Dan. What happens when if the total quota is arrived at?
Great
80%,
question,
we drop
Bill.
to 2,500. What happens if we get to the end? Does everybody stop fishing for mackerel?
Yeah, you know what what did Matt Bass call it? Stump the warden? Stump the director. Can we look that up and
Yeah,
continue the conversation?
sometime down the road, so long as we know.
Yeah.
My general feeling is that the mackerel fishery has been all over the map the last few years, ranging from bring us in more mackerel quick, we need it, we'll pay you good money for it, to we're all done with mackerel, we don't need any for another month, and we can't sell any in Boston, and we can't ship it anywhere because nobody wants it. So it is really kind of a mishmash at the moment. I'm not quite sure exactly what this is going to do to change that, but at least if we have an adopted limit that reduces the overall take over a period of time in the more productive period of the month of the summer months, it might stabilize things a little bit. I don't know, but I don't see anything here that is going to be particularly offensive to very many people. There may be a handful of top producers that are going to take a hit here. And I assume that they have something else that they can do while they're not catching their normal amount of mackerel during the time of year that they've been able to find markets for it. I can think of 3 or 4 boats off the top of my head, but they're good fishermen, and I'm assuming they'll have other opportunities. So I'm going to support this and hope that somehow Atlantic mackerel shows up in numbers that makes the scientists believe that the stock is as healthy as I believe it is, but maybe isn't always where they expect it to be when they add up their numbers. So those are my comments. Thank you, Dana. You can find out about that if you would, and let me know down the road.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Mike Pearnock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Dan, Mass DMF and as well as myself were involved in the Mid-Atlantic's decision, and this complements such, in which there was just a handful of boats that this really impacted at the limited access end. Is this the amount of state boats, permitted vessels we're looking at, are they the same vessels? Are they different vessels, or are there a lot more permits, or just a few? I'm just curious.
I'd have to call on Story to get a handle on the number of permits and the number of active permits, because we created the permit Oftentimes people will buy that permit just to prevent the state from, taking it away. But, I don't know, Story, if you have a handle, or you or Anna, on the number of active permits.
I don't, but I can start with the number that we issued last year, which was the first year we issued it, and it was almost 2,500. Now, remember, you needed that if you were going to possess more than 20 mackerel per person on board. So I think a lot of people got it. Like you said, a new endorsement, you just get it, but also people to cover themselves if they were going tuna fishing or commercial striped bass fishing and might have more than that on board.
And that would also cover all of the federal permit holders too, because it was required for possessing or landing mackerel. So it wouldn't be specific just to the state only participants.
I see Anna has her hand up.
Anna, you're recognized. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to add to what Story said, that the percentage of active state-only boats was quite low according to dealer data, but we are still receiving all the harvester data, so we don't have a full picture of the activity yet and won't for several more months.
Michael, are you satisfied with that response?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank
Nicola?
You,
In
Nicola.
response, yes, in response to your question, Mr. Chairman, about the quota level, it's been reduced from about 8 million pounds in 2023 to 1.9 million pounds for 2024.
Thank you, Nicola. At one time I had read 13 million, but I'm sure you have it right in front of you. So thank you very much. And, I really don't believe our small boat harvesters will be impacted with this recommendation, other than maybe a couple that land over 5,000 pounds. I know the industry boats that prosecuted the mackerel fishery, I don't even think they're going because the limits are so low. So, there should be enough quota for the small boat harvesters in the state of Massachusetts. So, shall somebody make a motion on this, or if there's any more questions or comments on the recommendation before we
I'll
make
move the motion.
Thank you, Bill. Seconded by,
I'll second that.
who's that, Bill Doyle?
Yes.
Thank you, Bill. Jared?
Mike Peardnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Cleo Bogdan,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Dan, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, we've been at it for 2 hours. Let's take a 10-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jared, can you throw up a slide on the screen that says we're on break till 10:15?
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're good.
Thank you very much, Jared. So we can move along to staying the commercial welt gauge increase.
Yep. Okay, Ray. So to the commission. This is a unique proposal on my part. I'm requesting approval of a 3-year hiatus in these gauge increases, specifically to allow the beginning of a management strategy evaluation, which is a common approach these days in fisheries management, where there's almost like a third-party review, outsiders looking in, examine the biological data, the socioeconomic data, the compliance, issues and the management challenges, and take a fresh look at whether or not this is the right path forward for managing the whelk fishery. This has been kind of a challenge for me, even going back 15 years, when we've been a lot of the support that we've gotten from the commission still has come with some misgivings on part of individual commission members about whether this is the best path forward. One of the issues we really want to look at is doing some modeling where we can project forward, if we do get to the terminal minimum or gauge size, to protect up to 50% of the animals before spawning. What will that catch composition look like relative to male-female ratios, and whether there's other alternatives to create a more sustainable fishery. So I have there's a legislator in New Bedford, Representative Cabral, who's been his staff has been communicating with us for a better part of a year, and we're hopeful that we might see a legislative appropriation for this in this upcoming budget. And so in order to open the fishery on time this year and not have that gauge go forward, I'm asking for approval from the commission to basically suspend the gauge increases for 3 years while we conduct that study. And I'll take any questions.
Questions for the director?
Khalil?
Thank you, Jared.
Will, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How did the whelk fishers, how do they feel about this?
We have not heard any opposition to the proposal to delay the gauge increases for 3 years or more. And let me be clear, it's a 3-year request because it's going to take 2 to 3 years to do this management strategy evaluation. But if there is a recommendation for an alternative management strategy, before 3 years from now, we might be coming back to you with proposals that would replace the gauge increases or amend them or whatever. So it's not just a 3-year pause. It's a 3-year pause to allow us to do the MSE, management strategy evaluation, and then we'll take it from there to see the proper direction we want to take in the future. So the answer to your question is no opposition to this. Support, actually.
Questions for the director?
Thank you.
Shelley?
Shelley, you're recognized.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Jared. Dan, I just had a quick question about when we would anticipate hearing that those funds, are received or are in the works. Do you have kind of an idea of when that would be known?
Yeah, the House completes its budget usually by the end of April. So if this particular legislator was successful, we would see an enhancement of our budget on the House side. Obviously, the way the budget works is the Senate gets to do its budget and then they go to conference committee. So, no doubt, definitively, we wouldn't really know until the budget is signed. Sometimes that can be as late as July, but it's important that if we are going to do this management strategy evaluation, that we need to come up with some kind of commitment this summer, because the university, if they're going to hire a PhD student or take on a PhD student, they're not going to come unless there's a funding commitment. So I'll be working with the department and with our DMF CFO to scramble to try to put this together. I think this is important. And it's not too much money. It'd be 75,000 per year for 3 years. That's what it costs to take on a PhD student. And that'll be what I hope to see. Budgets only allocate funds 1 year at a time. So I'm hopeful that we'll see the first year funding by the summer.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
Questions for the director?
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Jared. Dan, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what exactly are the possibilities for alternative management in this? It reminds me a little bit of the old meat count on the scallop fishery, when we tried to base what we were doing with scallops on the number of meats that equaled a pound. And that was problematic from the beginning right through the whole program. And they came up with something much better, but it turns out it's a little bit like what we're aiming at here, is a larger ring size to ensure that the scallops are already mature, and then some. So, but what are the alternatives? Do you have an idea that you can share with us?
Well,
what the possibilities might be.
I don't want to. I don't want to assume what this management strategy evaluation would conclude, but you could have a slot limit. You could protect larger animals. And the thinking is a lot of those larger animals are females. Of course, unlike a lobster or a crab, you can't tell the sex from the outside of the animal. So it's not like you can, protect, or horseshoe crabs. You can't protect an animal. You can't detect its gender and then release it. So, but you could have a slot limit where you're taking, animals, with a minimum and a maximum size. You could have a trip limit. You could. So I guess those are the two. I think we're most concerned that we want to make sure that we're not driving the fishery in such a way that we wind up having an exclusive female fishery. We want to make sure that we can study those growth rates through a modeling exercise to make sure that even if we did go forward with these gauge increases, to make sure that the sex ratio in the end is going to make some sense, biologically. You could have a quota.
Okay, so
IFQs.
It's open-ended. You really don't know. It's going to depend on.
I'm open-minded on it.
Yep.
I mean, there's been this is a really interesting species, because this is the one that is exclusively ours. Like, we don't have an interstate plan looking over our shoulder like we do striped bass. We don't have a federal plan like we do with summer flounder. We can manage this on our own, and in the current regime, where we've managed this thing in such a way that the net result has been what we think is a truncated size distribution and a reduction in the overall population size. And the question is, how do we want to manage this going forward? The upside is with fewer whelks being harvested, the overall effort is down, which means not only are there fewer vertical lines that might ensnare a leatherback, but there's probably also less horseshoe crabs that are being cut up and put into bait bags or needed. And so, but while this is not optimal in terms of the optimal yield in terms of biological productivity, there are other benefits to a fishery on a reduced stock. And so, we can take a look at all of that. But no one's going to come in and sue us for failing to reach MSY or optimal yield, because this is an orphan species in terms of having oversight from federal or interstate commissions.
All right. The last thing I commented is, don't forget to include the industry as advisors in
Oh, sure.
development of this plan. I know you would do that
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
but
that's exactly, that's a huge part of an MSC is to include the industry. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Questions
Khalil?
for the director?
Khalil?
Thank you,
Khalil,
Jared. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Dan, I do like the idea of the slot limit, given the differential growth rates between male and female whelk. I think that, you know, right after first blush, it sounds like a very logical way to handle this situation. And I agree with Bill that we need to get the industry involved with this decision making. And but I just want to say I thought that, you know, I never thought about, you know, a slot limit for a gastropod, but it might be something that's worth looking into.
Yep, that's what we hope to hear. I mean, it's a little challenging because if the animal grows, there's two ways to measure a whelk, right? There's the width of the shell with the gauge that we've developed, and then there's the total length. Some states have total length. And so if you did have a slot and you were able to, you know, if the animal is really close to the minimum size, you know, the problem with the slot is that you could manipulate the shell. Like you could knock the bottom off the siphon to make it shorter, or you could kind of wear the shell down. So, you know, because there's so many animals so close to that minimum size. So it's not perfect, but you know, I think we need some buy-in in the end of the day from the harvesters, and I think that's been somewhat missing. I'm a little disappointed. You know, maybe it's on us to try to get some of the participants to embrace, you know, like some kind of a management scheme that would create a long-term sustainable fishery. And that would be the goal, especially as Bill Amaru points out, if you can include them in the discussions, in the development of a new management strategy, maybe we could get more buy-in.
Thank you.
questions?
Mike?
Mike Piernock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I agree with the previous comments by the members around the table. I'm just curious, we have examples with changing environmental conditions and shifting stocks, and we have those species which are winners or losers depending upon the outcome of that environmental condition and that change. And with this downward trend, I'm just curious if black sea bass and tog eat whelk, and with the significant biomass of black sea bass that we have in our waters, which has changed over time and continues to, you know, come into our waters and go farther north, are they playing part in this reduction because they're eating them? Has that been looked at? Will that be looked at as part of the MSC, as well as other species that have now migrated or moved into our waters that have not been native to our waters in the past?
Well, I don't know about diet studies, but I can say that this particular species, the northern end of the range is Cape Cod. So I think we would be considered winners. You might even start seeing them more abundant in Cape Cod Bay if the waters continue to warm. But we're probably likely winners, and this species would be among the winners. It is also abundant all the way down to Virginia. So, you know, horseshoe crabs too. I mean, other than some of the other life history challenges about spawning beaches, I think our warming temperature regimes are probably optimal for this species going forward. But I'll ask staff to see if there's, you know, in the future, come back to you with any evidence of what eats whelks. We can look that up for you, Mike.
Thank you.
Questions?
Not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
I
We
have
can
two
move for a
questions,
motion.
one directed to the director. So the university we're talking about is SMAS, right?
That's right.
We're gonna get somebody with a doctorate. Thank you. And secondly, Shelley, have you received your funding for the sex ratio study? And have you been able to afford to bring on a student this summer to assist you?
No, Ray, we haven't received any funding yet for that.
So should that be questioned at this point? Dan, do you know anything about the funding for Shelley's research project on the sex ratio?
I do not.
And who could we go to for that? I don't see, is Sarah Ferrara on this call?
No.
Oh, okay, so where are you at, Shelley, on your project?
We haven't really built it out yet, Ray, to be honest. It's just lots of other things have taken priority, but I'd love to speak with Dan and Bob and see if there's any way we can build out a proposal, and then I can search for some grants. But I do think it could be some great data to include. So I'll talk with Dan and Bob and try to push it forward and get their ideas and input.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Dan. So we need a motion if there's no further questions or comments.
I move the question. Khalil.
Khalil, thank you. I need a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Shelley. Jared?
Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all. Moving on to the commercial smooth dogfish trip limits.
Simple proposal, Ray. We did this, last year, I think by declaration, but we want to build it into the regulation to go to 300 pounds. And the state is issued a smooth dog quota that is underutilized.
And will we be taking this up at the spring meeting at ASMFC?
Nicola, I think got clearance from this, from the board that we don't need to. However, if we do want to accommodate the back-to-back fishing days for the inshore trawler fleet with sealed containers for each day, we might have to bring that up and get their approval on that as well. Nicola, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, you're correct, Dan. Just because the proposal that we had approved previously specified a 300-pound trip limit per day or per trip, whichever is the longer time period. So if we wanted to accommodate the 2 possession limits, we'd have to get ASMC support for that. I would not anticipate that being at the May meeting though, but potentially the August meeting.
Thank you, Nicola. Questions, comments?
Khalil?
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Just a question, and I'm going to vote yes for this, but I'm just curious as to if there is a actual need for 300 pounds and who's calling for the increase in the poundage.
So the quota's been vastly underutilized. We generally take less than 25% of it. There's one dragger who targets and dresses the smooth dogfish, and he requested that we increase it just to increase the profitability of his trips. It's not a large scale, request for it. It's to just accommodate the few draggers who fish Nantucket Sound who would be, interested in targeting and dressing this product for landing, that we're interested in it, and we have ample quota available to accommodate it.
Yeah, and Jared, I'm not sure the word target is accurate because
Yeah, that's probably fair.
They're fluke fishing and smooth dogfish come up in the net, and the question is, do you toss them or can you retain them? And
Yeah,
it's
that's
still
what I was thinking. This is more of a bycatch type of a fishery.
Yes.
Yes, and Bill Amaru has his hand up, and I know he's probably
Yeah.
I can shed some light on your question, Khalil. And this is the deal. When we were fishing and catching an occasional smooth dogfish years ago, one of the reasons that it was not brought in was because our buyers told us they didn't have enough product to actually create a reason to have the stuff in the truck to bring it to Boston or New York, wherever it was going. By increasing it to 300 pounds, and there were days, many days when we had that many. These dogfish are not like spiny dogfish. They get pretty big. You can get 20, 25-pound fish. And dressed correctly, the flesh is this is a good eating fish. Unfortunately, dogfish have certainly had their share of bad PR, but this fish is a pretty good eating fish. And the 300 pounds will allow for the guys to bring them in, ice them down, and put them along with the other products that are going into the marketplace. So I'm very much in favor of it. I'm happy to see it, and we'll support it.
I'm in favor of it also, but I was just curious. I said whether this was.
Yeah, I hope that helps you to see how it could be beneficial.
You clarified it. Thanks so much, Bill.
Further questions and comments?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Need a motion?
I'll move the motion.
Thank you, Bill. Seconded by
Brady, second.
Tim Brady, seconding the motion. Jared?
Mike Peardnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Cleo Bogdan,
Yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
All right. Last recommendation.
Amendments to sanitary shellfish harvest and handling rules. Who's got this, Dan?
Well, if Chrissy were on, I'd give it to her, but I think Jared, you could.
Chrissy's on.
Oh, okay. Chrissy, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't sure who was going to handle it. So yes.
Good morning, Chrissy, and you're welcome.
We like to hear different voices.
Well, thank you. This should be pretty quick. We made some changes to the Vibrio control plan last year where we revised the definition of adequate icing. It just now made the Vibrio control plan out of sync with the regs. So we're looking to update and revise the regulation language. This recommendation to revise the language from 2 inches on the top and 2 inches on the sides, and very prescriptive amounts of ice in different layers. We're basically proposing to change it to completely and continuously covered. And what this does is it basically allows a little more discretion in how much ice to be used, and it also it makes it a little bit easier to enforce and check compliance without having to pull out a ruler. This is something that, for the most part, is well received. Also, in the Vibrio control plan last season, we implemented an exemption for harvesters from using from the initial icing requirement if the dealer is taking possession of the shellfish at the landing site and within the time to icing window. We found that this was actually happening anyway, and as long as it was done appropriately, it really wasn't adding any public health risk or time temperature abuse. So we added the exemption in the Vibrio control plan, which meant we needed to update our regs to be consistent with the Vibrio control plan. Another recommendation, number 2 here, is shellfish tagging. We just want to make it abundantly clear that we expect the most specific designation of the growing area to be listed on the tags. Every shellfish growing area has an alphanumeric ID, and for the most part, they've been putting part of the alphanumeric ID, but they were not using the decimal point. And any given growing area, and we gave the example in the public hearing of CCB 13. So most tags would say CCB 13, but if you look at the actual map of CCB 13, that overall growing area is divided into sub-classification areas, and some areas within CCB 13 are actually closed in the prohibited status. And so a dealer receiving a tag that says CCB 13 cannot be sure that that product was harvested from as an approved source. So basically, we're just making it clear that we expect that most specific alphanumeric sequence that includes the decimal designation. Part 3, number 3 in this list, we want to make it abundantly clear that in all handling practices, including overwintering, land-based overwintering, we expect them to be held, the shelf stock to be held in sanitary conditions. It came to our attention that some aquaculturists were utilizing Zamboni ice, so shaved rink ice that's on the parking lot outside of skating rinks to cool and overwinter their oysters. And so we want to make it clear that even though that product is not meant to be direct marketed, that product is destined to be returned to the site and resubmerged to, pump in the clean water for another 14 days, that it's still not an acceptable practice. And I think overall, we have a lot of support for that from industry. We had some pushback. We did get an initial letter from the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association, and we had one individual at the Bourne public hearing that was speaking out against this because they felt it really wasn't a public health threat. But after the closing of the public comments, I had a couple of prominent aquaculturists say, well, I didn't think I needed to give any comments in support of this regulation, but do you want me to? Because they recognize that if there was a media piece on this, it would really have a detrimental impact on public confidence in our shellfish product. So I think even though we've had some vocal, I guess, like East Coast Shellfish Growers Association is a industry representative that has a lot of clout. And so even though we've had that level of disagreement with this, I think overall we have a high level of industry agreement with this change. Night closures, we're adopting a statewide night closure for commercial harvest of shellfish from 1/2 hour after sunset to 1/2 hour before sunrise. This closure is already in effect for aquaculture product. We're basically extending it so it applies to wild harvested shellfish as well. For the most part, individual towns are instituting this night fishing prohibition through their municipal regs. This allows us to have it a statewide standard. It allows our EPOs to cite these night fishing as a violation of state regs. This would still maintain allowance for the state managed mobile gear fisheries for sea scallops and surf clams to fish from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then the final proposed recommended change is for some language to allow the primary sale location to have an alternative primary sale location if approved by the DMF director. This was brought about because the town of Barnstable had a landing location at Blish Point where during the peak boating season, it was evident that there was a public safety risk because there was restaurants right there at that landing location. There are ferry boats and lines for the ferry boats. And so to have the dealer trucks meeting the harvesters right there at that landing location, it just didn't make a lot of sense from a public safety perspective. And the town of Barnstable had requested a variance from being required to either land at the point of landing or conduct the transaction at the point of landing or drive directly to your dealer's brick and mortar facility. And so we ended up issuing a letter of authorization, and this language, this regulation language, just basically allows the director, it gives them the additional regulatory jurisdiction to authorize such a change in the landing. Any questions?
Questions and comments for Chrissy?
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I have one comment, and I'm hoping you can address it. Under shell stock icing, that portion of the rule, clarify only ice made from potable water may be applied to shellfish. I guess nobody mentioned the possibility of having a saltwater ice that would not be considered potable, but would be taken out of the water. I know our boat and other boats in the harbors near where I fish from have ice makers on their boats. And just so that down the road, if these boats get involved in fisheries where they have to use their saltwater ice, which they have access to, it wouldn't be considered potable, but it would be clean enough, I would assume, that you'd allow it to be used to ice the shellfish. Can you make a comment on that?
Well, there is, in the case of an ice slurry, we do say that the water used from the growing area in the approved status can be used for the ice slurry.
Okay,
So obviously we wouldn't consider it a public health risk to make the ice itself out of the ice slurry. I don't know. I would defer to Jared. Do you think that warrants any change in this language if somebody did want to? Because I don't think we would object to somebody making ice out of the actual seawater in the open status. I just don't think it's something that really happens.
Yeah, I
well,
think that
it
would be
does
something
happen.
we
It
can,
does?
Yes,
we
we have
would,
ice makers that use saltwater ice to, saltwater to make their ice.
Jared,
for which fisheries, Bill?
Well, right now, it's for the fisheries that we pursue. There's some scalloping that we use it to ice our scallops in the bags, but if we ever got to where we would be handling live scallops, which is happening, or some other shellfish down the road, I wouldn't want the language to be applied so narrowly that we may not be able to use our own ice making equipment using salt water.
Give me 1 second, Bill. I just need to pull something up. I don't think the regulations as they're currently written contemplate that.
Yeah. You know, but as what I'm reading here says, clarify, only ice made from potable water may be applied to shellfish. If you could put an asterisk next to potable water and just say salt water harvested for saltwater use, ice makers would be exempt. Something along those lines.
Yeah, Jared, I guess the same language we use for the slurry.
Yep.
Growing waters that are in the open status.
Yep. So if that's already in the language, then I'm not concerned. I just don't see
Well,
it here.
it's in the VP language for the use of
Right.
ice slurries for handling oysters. It's not contemplated in the general icing language in our regulations.
So that's a
Potable
good
water
pickup,
source is
Bill.
defined as
Yeah, you could, if
municipal
it could be,
drinking water and non-municipal drinking water, and it doesn't for non-municipal water sources, its compliance with drinking water quality standards shall be documented by proof of water quality testing completed within 6 months by a laboratory certified by DEP or EPA to perform drinking water analyses. It does not contemplate saltwater icing.
yeah, okay, so I mean, it might be splitting hairs, but Suki and I really prize what hair we have left, so we're going to ask that that be considered.
Yeah. So Jared, can you insert that into this recommendation under number 3? In
That's
order
what you want, Dan. Yeah.
Yeah. Chrissy, are you good
Yeah,
with
that
Bill's-
makes sense. That was a
Bill's
great
recommendation?
catch.
All right,
So would it be voted on as amended here?
yes. Well, yes, if Jared can make that amendment.
Thank you, Dan.
Good catch, Bill.
My dad used to say, you know, even a blind squirrel finds a nut now and then.
I would add approved or conditionally approved and in the open status.
All right.
All right. Khalil?
Thank you, Jared. I just want to commend the team for having a primary sale location. I think anytime we can make it more efficient for our harvester, regardless of the species, to offload their product more efficiently is really commendable. I can speak firsthand about the bottleneck at Bliss Point when I was chartering out of Barnstable Harbor. And I was directly not involved, but observed the conflicts that were occurring when folks were trying to come in and offload their products, and you had boats backed up. And so I commend the team for this concept of a primary sale location.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Khalil.
Khalil.
Further questions or comments on this recommendation?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chrissy, for being on, and
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
we appreciate your time. Well, will somebody please make a motion?
Move the question. Khalil.
Khalil, thank you. Seconded by
I'll second that, Ray.
Bill Doyle with the second.
Bill Doyle. Jared?
Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Bill Ammer,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer.
Yes.
Thank you all. I think we're through our action items, so we will move along to final permitting actions. Updates to permit transferability rules.
Yep, I
Yeah.
can take this, Mr. Chair. Dan, you want me to do that?
Yes, the commission doesn't need to vote on these, right?
Correct.
That's correct.
Right, but as is our tradition, we're bringing this to you for a kind of consensus so that the director isn't perceived as to going out of kilter. So go ahead, Story.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move forward with these two proposed changes to the permit transferability rules as presented during the public comment period. So no changes to what we have proposed. And the two proposals are, first, to allow the transfer of latent but otherwise transferable endorsements and a transfer to an immediate family member. And secondly, relax the transferability standards for black sea bass, tautog, and fluke endorsements from actively fished for 4 out of the past 5 years to 2 out of the past 5 years. These proposals came from discussions with our permit focus group and the industry over the past few years, and the comments that we got at public hearing were generally favorable to both of these. So in terms of rationale, the immediate family transfer proposal mirrors the practice that is already in place for our coastal lobster permits. And these immediate family transfers would allow family businesses to remain intact. The second proposal would increase the supply of available endorsements for those 3 endorsements, sea bass, tautog, and fluke, which may reduce barriers to entry to better accommodate new entrants and deepen existing permit portfolios of existing permit holders. And the figures below show that this action of shifting from 4 out of the past 5 years to be transferable to 2 out of the past 5 years at least double the number of potentially transferable endorsements that would be out there. And of those, about half of those permit holders are 60 or older, which, we can't predict who's going to transfer, but if you want to just consider the age factor, many of those might be looking to retire or get out or pass those along soon. So that's what the numbers show, potential doubling of the number available. And another justification for relaxing those standards is that rod and reel effort is variable, making the existing threshold of 4 out of 5 years difficult to reach. And attrition is occurring as these permits are retired and not transferred. So I'll stop there and pause to see if there are any questions on these two before we just talk about the housekeeping items briefly.
Questions? Comments?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
I question the 2 out of 5 years. What kind of landings are we talking? What's the threshold? 100 pounds, 500 pounds?
Yep. We have a policy now that says these are essentially rod and reel endorsements. And we have a policy now that an active year is considered landing at least one trip limit in aggregate for the year. So say it's 200 pounds for one of these species. That's what we're looking for, at least that, if that's the possession limit.
Thank you, Story.
Yep. Okay, Jared, I guess we can move on to the housekeeping. So there are 3 items here. The first would allow the electronic display of the commercial fishing permit to an environmental police officer. This mirrors what we do for our recreational fishing permits. And it also is in line with the capabilities of our updated permitting system, which for next year will allow for online renewals, or potentially later this year, but we're pretty much through our renewal season. But it would allow people who renew online to save a copy of that permit on their phone and display that rather than the printed copy. So we just think this makes things easier in the field for everybody. The second action would enhance the definition of immediate family to extend to step and adopted families. And this is something that we've run across a little bit more recently, and I'll just read the current definition of immediate family member. It means the legal father, mother, wife, husband, sister, brother, son, daughter, grandparent, or grandchild. So we would just essentially be adding legal step and adoptive families members to that. It kind of brings our definition up to date a little bit, and it would be consistent with the definition elsewhere in Massachusetts law and regulation today. The third action would just eliminate an outdated reference to the waiting list for coastal lobster permits. We no longer have that list and don't intend to use it in the future. So just cleaning up some remnant language there. And that's it.
Thank you, Story. Any questions or comments for Story?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Then this is a DMF workload, so I presume we can move along here with our.
Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Ray, the last, the next
Emergency
item
action.
here is emergency actions. And so there's 2 features. There's the black sea bass, scup, and summer flounder rules, which I'm gonna have Nicola cover, and then there's the filleting of striped bass. You know, the experienced commission members have been through this before, where we get our marching orders in the late winter or early winter from the Mid-Atlantic Council and the board that you, Ray, and Nicola serve on at ASMFC, for us to make tweaks to our recreational rules regarding those 3 species. And we have to come up with the formula to meet the conservation goal. And that's always some combination of season, bag, and size. And so what we do is we hold a public scoping meeting. Feels like a public hearing, but it's technically not, because we don't have enough time to, go through the normal rulemaking process mandated under state law. But we get those comments, we take those comments, we come to you today to ask you to support an action that you will agree that, like, later this summer or within 90 days to enact as a final rule. But in the interim, I would file this as an emergency regulation. The nature of the emergency is because we get these directives so late in the process, we can't possibly go through our normal 4 to 6 month rulemaking process like every other thing we just approved today. And instead we have to do emergency. But I'll listen to you folks today and make amendments to this, but if needed. But I think what we have here is a pretty good package that has a lot of support. It was a pretty quiet public scoping meeting. And so that's the first one. And then the second one has to do with the striped bass plan. In addition to the reduction of the commercial quota by 7%, there's also language in here that says that we need to clarify or about filleting at sea and retain racks. So that was part of the plan. So Nicola, why don't I hand it to you and talk about the kind of feedback we got and how you're dealing with our neighboring states and where possible to have common management measures.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just a kind of a quick recap. But the slide here shows the options that we have selected to move forward with. In the case of summer flounder, we needed to take a 28% reduction in harvest, and we brought to the scoping meeting a range of 10 options that looked at various bag size and season combos, and most of the support, which was coming from the for-hire mode, supported this option, which is to take the reduction primarily through a 1-inch minimum size increase. There was just a couple of comments, that were concerned about increasing the size limit and what that does to discards. And I do think it's notable that we remember that when we take mandatory harvest reductions through a size limit increase, that's what contributes to the disparity in the commercial and recreational size limits that is often raised by the public. But this does, by going that 1-inch increase, we're able to maintain most of the season and keep the bag limit at 5 fish. And if you look at our history in summer flounder management, we've been as high as 18 or 18.5 inches in the past. So this is not an unprecedented size limit. It's also one of the lower size limits along the coast. And with summer flounder, it's a state specific reduction. So we didn't have to, work necessarily with any other states, but a lot of the states are looking at minimum size increases as well. For SCUP, we do work as a region with Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York to try to maintain consistent regulations as much as possible. So as a region, we were looking to reduce harvest by 10% as required. And the preferred approach out of the 3 that were taken to scoping in all of the states was this 1/2-inch size limit increase to the vessel-based modes of fishing, the private vessel and for-hire vessel. And then with black sea bass, there's not a requirement to reduce harvest. It was a requirement for status quo management, but with an allowance to make some very small seasonal adjustments that would not be projected to increased harvest. So this shift just aligns the opening date with on a Saturday, as has been kind of a traditional for this fishery, and we just have to adjust the end date to account for that and not have an increase in harvest. So as Dan said, there was not a ton of angler comment on these options. I think the fact that there was not more significant changes proposed for black sea bass was part of that. That tends to be a species that really draws out public input more. But we think that these are the best options for the fishery at this time.
Questions, comments? Thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nicola. The recreational community, there's been a number of individuals are happy to see this shoreside thresholds for summer flounder and scup, which recognizes that the fact that the smaller fish that's in general available for a shoreside angler, and with increased temperatures, the bigger fish move farther away, farther into deeper, cooler water. So heard a lot of favorable response to that, and that is appreciated. I think that you've heard this from me, you've heard this from others, and it continues to be the case. And what we see in the water with the biomass of black sea bass and scup is inconsistent with our seasons and bag limits, and that whether it's an expanding stock or a shifting stock, we have a tremendous number of those fish in our waters. And to some extent with summer flounder, but if you're in Nantucket Shoals, Nantucket Sound, you got a great fishery. If you're in other areas, we we have the same difficulty that with increased temperatures, they moved off into deeper, cooler water. So ultimately, I will support this measure, and I think it's the best we can do considering the outcome of the science that was the science and what is needed to comply with the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point out that for summer flounder and scup, these would be 2-year measures. So you can anticipate that we will not be returning to you this time next year to change the summer flounder and scup rules. However, black sea bass, it is just 1 year. There's a research track assessment was just concluded for sea bass, and the management track assessment is occurring now. And so that stock assessment will inform setting of measures next year. And, there were some advancements in it that look at, how, environment is playing a role in the recruitment of black sea bass. So I'm very interested to see what the next stock assessment tells us about abundance in the northern region for sea bass.
So Nicola, my question to you is, will we be seeing the black sea bass assessment at the annual meeting, or next winter's meeting? So once again, we're in this emergency rule.
I believe that the assessment will be available to the commission and council in late summer, so feed into the kind of the normal specification setting timeline. But that normal timeline does have us coming, this time of year with the recreational measures.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments on this?
Bill Lamoureux.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. Nicola, is the 16.5-inch black sea bass minimum size the same? I don't see another one crossed out. So is that the current minimum size?
It is, yes. It's just the
Okay.
season that's being, minorly shifted.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we made that shift for the for hire fleet, so they get that weekend, right? May 18th is a Saturday.
That's correct.
Thank you, Nicola.
Mike Peardock.
Michael, you're
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Nicola, thank you for pointing that out about the research stock assessment that's going on. Dr. Larry, I think his last name is Leday, made a presentation at the council concerning the model that's going to be used and what's taking place. And it is positive to see that these different environmental factors and ecosystem-based factors are going to be taken into consideration this go around. I had pointed out some concerns about discard mortality. Again, you've heard this before from us, and how our discard mortality up here is a little different than what's observed further south. It was interesting that Dr. Larry, I apologize, I can't pronounce his last name, but I pointed out what our observations are with the movement of those fish, where they are, when where the spatial distribution and extent with temperature over time, and then how that corresponds to surveys that are conducted, and the fact that the biomass may not be getting captured because of that inconsistency. But hopefully these other environmental factors will help get us there. We're not quite there yet, but it is just frustrating for me and many others to see the disconnect, but positive to see that there's steps being taken to try to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Nicola. If there's no further questions or comments for Nicola, I would like to thank
moving on.
Okay, Ray, the last topic is striped bass filleting, and this comes to us because of the recent approved striped bass addendum. Mike Armstrong is my proxy on the striped bass board, and he and Nicola have worked on this over the last few weeks. And this was also included in the scoping meeting when we requested comments from the recreational sector on the black sea bass, scup, and fluke proposals. And so we going to go to emergency action in order to comply this season with that minor detail of the addendum. Not only is it going to allow the or require the for hire fleet to conform with these new provisions about retaining racks, but it tries to address once and for all some of the confusion about what regular anglers can do. When can they dispose of that rack? So Nicola, I'm going to turn it over to you for the details.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So the addendum establishes two requirements for states that allow filleting in the recreational fishery, that the racks be retained and that no more than 2 fillets are possessed. We already have that second one in our for hire filleting allowance. So part 3 of the changes here is the one that addresses the retention of racks. There was a lot of concern from the charter boats about this new requirement, and so we've written the language consistent with that feedback, that it doesn't say anything about that you have to get rid of the racks before you start fishing on the next trip. Things like that we saw in some other states' rules, that the feedback was that might be inconsistent with their planned practices, such as keeping the racks after 2 trips and then giving them to somebody else to use as bait. So we tried to be as the least prescriptive when necessary to provide for flexibility, but also write the rule very clearly so that there wouldn't be confusion. The number 2 here addresses just a minor tweaking to give a little bit more flexibility to the captain and crew to fillet fish even after they've gone back to the dock, in the event that there are conditions at sea that prevent the filleting to occur at sea, which is what the rule currently says. So that's just a minor tweak. During that scoping meeting, we also had a request at the meeting and also in several written comments to change our current requirement that mandates that the full skin stay intact on the fillets, to kind of roll that back to just a 2 square inch patch, now that the racks have to be kept as well, which helps with the identification, and that 2 square inch rule is consistent with our groundfish filleting rules. So we accommodated that. And then the last part is not addressing the for hire mode, but the shoreside mode, private vessel mode, to clarify that the expectation is for fish to be brought in whole, except for evisceration, bleeding, and descaling, and for while on the waters or in the adjacent areas to tidal waters, so that it provides some minimal amount of time for any inspections to occur with the size limits. And that's the whole reason for these new requirements in the ASMC plan, is to provide law enforcement the opportunity to check for that size and possession limits are being followed. And I think that's all on that, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Nicola. Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
So this is not an action item for the commission, but I believe the director asked and portrayed it as a consensus vote by the commission. So anybody on the commission opposed to what DMF is about to do or we're really required to do?
Mike, is there a question, comment, or opposition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jared. Mr. Chair, as for questions, I do have a comment. If I can have the floor.
Yes, by all means, Michael.
Thanks, amigo. I'm fine with what's here, and it provide clarity to what needs to be done for the rec for hire and shoreside and so on. I would hope that this could provide possibly an opportunity that with the striped bass fish app program that the state has successfully had participation in the past few years, that maybe this is an opportunity or food for thought that one could take a photograph with the details and provide a mechanism then to submit that. And maybe that's a first step that could be done to consider through a pilot or part of that process to then make that something to be done in the future. So I realize what difficulty it is to do such things through the recreational bio program, which is presently being undertaken for cod through the Stellwagen Bank Charter Boat Association and Rhode Island Charter Boat Association. But you know, for some food for thought for the future, because it is 2024, and with technology that exists, it's you know, maybe that's another option. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So Nicola, we would have to bring that forward at a commission meeting, right? That idea?
Yes, that would require another addendum to a measure that was just adopted unanimously by the board.
Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, hey, Mike Pierdonock, one thing that comes to mind for me is when the board voted up that, a rule a couple of years ago on the need for circle hooks on tubed worms. And we kind of thought it was questionable. And then I think there was good consensus up and down the coast among organized charter boat organizations that all kind of, rallied together. What I'm looking at in this rule is there doesn't seem to be any noise on this from for hire entities in other states. So if you're going to propose like a future modification, you could get the comparable organizations to yours in the other states. I think that would carry a little bit more weight and help move some of those other delegations, to your position, because we'd have to get a vote on this and prevail, as in the majority.
Thank you, Director. Understood, Michael?
Yeah, it's just a comment. I'm not asking to go to the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission with such a proposal. I'm looking at a mechanism to possibly do it as part of what's being done here with the state app. Because food for thought here is that the recreational bio project that's presently being conducted includes photographs of cod with the size and the photograph being collected. And the purpose of that study and that pilot is then to take that, submit that photograph, and to use it for fishery management purposes. So that's the initial pilot, to go through that mechanism to do that. Which, as we know, you have to have science behind it, and here's the opportunity for that science. So as I look at that being conducted there for cod, and then potentially being conducted, if we're successful with that on other species, that maybe that be provided an opportunity to do it in the future for striped bass or for other species. So
yeah, Mike,
I'm not
I'm with you.
asking.
No, I'm agreeing
Yeah.
with you. All I'm saying is, if you do think you come up with a great idea, my only recommendation is to enlist the support of analogous organizations in the other states, just so that it makes our job a little bit easier when we go to sell it. It's not just a Massachusetts issue, it'll be a universal issue. That'd be better. But yeah,
Understood.
I think there's ways to address this.
Yep. No, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. And
Chris
thank you,
McGuire?
BMF staff. Questions, comments?
Chris McGuire?
Chris, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pile on with Mr. Pierdonock's idea about using the app for length. I know that DMF has done great work with the Got One app and is collecting data for the recreational striped bass using that Got One app. And we've been actually supporting that app development over the last couple of years, and I know that they are working on an automated length identifier as a next feature for that app. And so, there might be an opportunity through the state's kind of existing pilot program, once the length thing is sorted out in the app, to start piloting data collection around that. But one of the challenges with collecting recreational data is that there's not much incentive to do it, to use those apps. There are the avid anglers and the technology geeks like me who might use it because they think it's neat, but there's not much real incentive. Where you can imagine an incentive that would allow you to fillet fish, on the boat instead of doing it in your kitchen. Could be a pretty big incentive for people to use an app like that. It would provide an actual benefit. Maybe we'd get some real-time data collection. So again, not something to go to ASMFC with right now, but I just think it's a really good idea that Mr. Piernock brought forward, and one that the state is already investing in, not only on the rec bio side with the charter for hire fleet, but also thinking about that on the recreational side. Again, but we've done a lot of work in this app space, and the incentives to using it are the biggest challenge, and this could really be one. And I think that there could be a lot of interest up and down the coast in that, because there are dozens of other apps out there that various groups have created to try and encourage recreational data collection. So just given that, like, the thing to keep on our radar and potentially invest in the future.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions or comments?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Well, Dan, you're good to go. I presume we've got consensus from the commission.
Thank you, Ray. And we're on to other business.
Yes, other business, upcoming public hearings and business meetings. Jared, is this yours or?
Yes, so as Dan indicated, there will be a public hearing this Friday at 8:30 a.m. at the Mass Lobstermen's Association annual weekend, dealing with Addendum 27 to the lobster plan, as well as the weak rope with the Mass Lobster Tracer in it. We will be having we're looking to get these recreational rules approved for May 1 to file by emergency, and then likely have a public hearing at the outset of a commission meeting this spring to finalize, and then a vote to finalize that. And then we have 3 dates coming up for commission meetings: April 23rd, May 21, and June 19. And I would be looking, based on interest from the commission, at holding at least 1 or 2 of those in person. We've tried to have the spring and fall meetings in person, so I just wanted to confirm with folks whether or not there would be any problems with holding those in person before I book them. Khalil?
Khalil, you're
muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Jared. June 19th, say, is it Wednesday? Is that going to be?
Oh, it would be June 18th, then. That should be updated. It's the Tuesday.
Thank you.
I also believe the 19th is a state holiday, so we wouldn't have it on that day, or federal holiday, so we wouldn't have it on that day as well.
June 19th.
So it would be the 18th.
It's Juneteenth. That's what it is.
Yeah.
On the 19th.
more thoughts from the commission members?
Chris McGuire?
Chris, you're recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to say, I support the idea of having the in-person meetings, and those dates all work for me, and I have those, kind of blanked off as in-person meetings on my calendar. So hopefully, as many of those as we can make in person, I think are really useful for the group.
All right. So I'll first try to book those for the Westboro facility to see if they have availability on those days, and if not, I will look at other the DMF facilities to see if we can host there.
Hey, Jared,
Yes, Bill.
I'm just thinking, would it be possible to have one of those meetings at Cat Cove?
I'd ask Mike or Nicola if there's space there to accommodate
Nicola?
a meeting. I haven't been, embarrassingly enough.
Oh,
Nicola?
you throw up a tent and it's a nice day. Sure. Yeah, but there's been some discussion about potentially doing that, so I think it could be accommodated with enough advance notice for a outdoor arrangement. The conference room here is a little bit on the smaller side, if there was much public in attendance, but
So, in the past, Jared, I know a lot of commission members, especially with the good weather, usually April through even into November, they would like in-person meetings. So, could we possibly schedule Westboro, New Bedford, and Cat Cove?
Certainly, I can figure out dates and times and well, not dates and times, but I can figure out which locations are available at which times and work that. Given Cat Cove would be an outdoor meeting, I think we'd probably want to have that be a summer meeting to maximize the opportunity that it's good weather.
So you're talking the June 18th meeting, but if we
Likely.
could do one in Westboro and one in New Bedford and one up there.
Yeah, I'll do some homework on that later this week and get back to everyone with anticipated locations.
Thank you, Jared. Other commissioners' comments on these dates and where we would like to have these in-person meetings? Bill Amaru or?
Yes, I'm looking at my schedule. It's impossible for me to be anywhere other than where I need to be on June 18th, and it won't be sitting in front of a computer. So the 18th is going to be a date I cannot attend a meeting electronically either. But that's not the end of the world. It's just my particular personal situation.
Mike Peardock?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say the dates work with me, for me, and as far as Westboro, New Bedford, or Cat Cove, that I'm fine with that also. Thanks.
Shelley?
Yeah,
Shelley?
I mean, I like New Bedford. But I would love to see Cat Cove, and I do know, spreading out our locations so everyone can get there in a easier way is great. So I'll accommodate. I will not be able to attend the May meeting though, just for record.
Bill Doyle?
I'm all set, Ray. Thank you.
Suki? Suki Sawyer?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Is this commission members' comments we're talking about here now?
Well, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on locations for these 3 upcoming meetings, right?
Yeah, I got no issues with that.
You have no issues. I think I've, Tim Brady?
Yeah, I will make can make my plans around what the consensus is. I'm going to be at sea.
Thank you. So at least we'll have quorum, Jared, from what I'm
Yeah.
hearing. Right. So yeah, do your thing. You do an excellent job arranging these meetings. So all right, I guess we can move along then. If everybody has spoken on that issue, the commission member comments. Let's start with Suki.
Thanks, Ray. This is Dan, Bob, and Tracy, maybe all together. Just a heads up for the roundtable this weekend. There's a lot of talk about the vent increase, not so much the gauge increase. You're gonna hear all that too, but I think specifically about the vent increase. I think you're gonna have to come up with some rationale to explain that if 100% of the new 3 3/8 lobsters are able to get through that, how can you justify all the lobsters that are a little bit bigger gonna be able to go through that same vent when the vent we have now, we know bigger lobsters go through it, so you might want to target that on the roundtable. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Sue. Dan, did you want to respond?
No, thanks, Suki. We always appreciate those heads up so we can do our homework in advance of those meetings. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Michael Piernock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to throw out there that there's Atlantic highly migratory species public comments and actually a Zoom call at 2 o'clock today. And it has to do with bluefin tuna, restricted fishing days, continued seasons and bag limits for bluefin commercially, and a few other matters. And that is on the docket at 2 o'clock today, as well as comment periods through the end of the month. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Bill Doyle.
I'm set, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you. Khalil.
I'm all set, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Chris McGuire.
Yeah, nothing really to add, just to say thanks to the DMF staff for all the work that went into the public meetings around all the action items today. I was really impressed by how well the DMF staff, kind of responds to public interest and, it really engages with people. And I think as a result, you end up with a meeting like today where you have pretty good approval of all the items that go forward because they've been really well vetted. So, as a person who's sort of new to this, I really appreciated participating in the public meeting down at Mass Maritime and seeing that whole process play through. So, just kudos to the team here.
Thank you, Chris. Shelley Edmondson.
No comment, Ray. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelley. Bill Amaru.
Yes, thank you, Ray. Yeah, I'm going to echo what Chris just pointed out. These documents for this particular meeting were absolutely the best that could have been created and produced for what we need to do and know. And my hat's off to all of the staff who had participated in doing it. It was very readable, and I'm very proud of this department and the division of government in the state of Massachusetts. We set an example that should be replicated throughout the country when it comes to management of marine resources. The other thing I want to say is, I don't know if people are aware of the fact that this past fall and winter, we had an incredibly reduced harvest of bay scallops in Cape Cod Bay waters. And this follows several really good years and is quite a contrast. Not the first time that that's ever happened, that there's been literally no survival from the previous years of juvenile scallops, but with all the changes that we're aware of going on around us in terms of climate change and invasives and others, it's something to bear in mind. And I see changes. I've been going to sea for almost 60 years, and I see changes now that are unprecedented in my history. Maybe I'm paying a little more attention to them than I used to, but it's just amazing. And it's going to be challenging down the road. And I'm not creating a gloom and doom situation, but we're going to need to remain very flexible and creative in all that we do when it comes to maintaining our positions in this industry. And thank you again.
Tim Brady.
All set, Ray. Thank you.
Is Commissioner Tom O'Shea on? Would he like to comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Do appreciate that, and great meeting today. Unfortunately, I had single parent duty this morning, couldn't get on until about 8:45, so apologies that I missed commissioner comments. I want to just add that we had a good trip to Gloucester about 3 weeks ago with Representative Ferrante and Senator Tarr, and we met with a lot of the Gloucester fishing community. I don't know if Dan covered that or not, but that was a really positive meeting, and I think we have some ideas on ways we can help and support the commercial fisheries there, and certainly be happy to talk more about that at some point. That was really helpful. I would also say that we had a very good meeting representing various organizations interested in coastal and ocean conservation at a meeting in Westboro a few weeks ago. So that was related to the governor's biodiversity executive order and well-attended, good workshop. Chris McGuire was in attendance, so we had some MFAC representation as well as our Fish and Wildlife Board. So that was a good event, and more to come on that as well. And I think it speaks to some of the things that we just heard from Bill Amaru regarding, how do we sort of prepare for the future and all the changes we're seeing. So I also went to the Seafood Expo with Dan and Story, some of my team. That was really eye-opening to see, the businesses across really internationally, as well as here in Massachusetts, and how, they're trying to market and add value to the seafood industry. So that was really interesting. So that's all I have, Chairman. Look forward to next meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Shea. And my comments are, I don't want to reiterate what all the commission members have spoken in their closing comments, but I'm very proud of DMF staff. They're diligent, hardworking people. And as spoken earlier, their public hearings, the way they engage with the public, their explanations, comprehensive. And this package was truly comprehensive. So my hat is off to you, Dan, and your entire staff. And I appreciate the participation by our commission members. It's the best it's ever been. So I'll close with that. I'm going to open this up to public comment. I'm sure you have hands, Jared.
I do. So if members of the public would like to comment, please use the raise hand function. That'll create a queue, and I'll call on you based on where you are in the queue. So, Allie Myers, you're recognized. Hello, Allie. All right, Allie, I'm going to come back to you. Jamie Bassett, you're recognized. Jamie, you're muted.
Thanks, Jared. I had no comment at this time.
Okay. Heidi Ritchie, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Heidi Ritchie, Director of Policy and Advocacy at Mass Audubon. I just wanted to express our thanks and our deep appreciation for the leadership of the commissioner and Dan McKiernan and all the work that Dan and his staff have done, particularly on horseshoe crabs. We really appreciate this action today, and we appreciate the thoughtful consideration by the members of the advisory commission as well, and all the time that you spend on this. And I also listened to many of the other parts of this meeting and just am really impressed by the professionalism and the careful thought that goes into all of these regulations. So just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Phil Coates. Phil, you're muted. Allie Myers, I'll come back to you. Phil, I'll come back to you. Okay, Mr. Chair, it doesn't look like. Phil,
Hello?
you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, my goodness. Between the hand raising and the unmuting, I get very frustrated, but anyway. Well, I'm going to add my comments briefly. I don't want to belabor some of the issues, but I thought, again, there's always the division does an amazing job, and the staff is great. And this was a very impressive meeting by all who participated. You probably are aware that I'm not the biggest fan of what's going on with striped bass right now. If you attended the Buzzards Bay hearing, you probably heard me at that meeting. And I'm going to prepare extensive comments, which I'd appreciate it if the division would receive and distribute to the commission rather than belabor you at this time. But with regard to striped bass and positivity, I had the pleasure of watching a YouTube video of a podcast with two of the division staffers concerning striped bass, tagging, and genetics. And I urge the commission to avail themselves of watching that. That is a bright spot in an otherwise what looks like to me a very dismal future of striped bass. Thank you for letting me comment, and I wish everybody well and look forward to seeing you or talking to you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Ally Myers, one more time. All right, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you.
I'd like to thank the public for listening to our lengthy commission meeting. And thank you for your closing or your comments. And on that, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded by
Tim Brady.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
This meeting is adjourned.